Chapter 1873. Pa pa pa. With another few sounds, the cloud-suppressing seal transformed into a few clouds that floated towards Chan Xing Yan's head. Xiao Hua's phoenix celestial body also let out a clear cry as it spread its wings and flew towards Chan Xing Yan. Seeing that Xiao Hua alone was able to fight against both Yin Qinglian and Xiang Yang, Chan Xing Yan couldn't help but panic. He clapped his hands, and a dozen yellow talismans flew aimlessly in the air. His other hand quietly took out a transmission talisman and sent it in the opposite direction of Xiao Hua. Just as he sent out the transmission talisman, his divine sense suddenly sensed that something was wrong behind him. Before he could send out the spell he hurriedly prepared, the dream executioner that killed Yu Yuemiao flew into Chan Xing Yan's back. Chan Xing Yan was like his senior brother Yu Yuemiao. His eyes were filled with disbelief and hatred as he fell from the sky. "Let's go." Xiao Hua saw that the Crimson Transmission Talisman increase its speed and fly towards the Flame Forest Mountains. He couldn't catch up and couldn't help but feel hatred. All of this was his meticulous plan, but he still couldn't stop the Transmission Talisman. Naturally, he couldn't stop the Golden Core Stage Xiang Min from chasing after him. How could he not be angry? "Let's go." Xiang Yang, Yin Qinglian, and Xue Xue didn't have the time to be shocked by Xiao Hua's bravery and gave them a new understanding of him. They hurriedly activated their flying techniques and flew towards Shihuang Town. Xiao Hua seemed to have a card up his sleeve. With a wave of his hand, flowing fire and the alms bowl were stored in his space. He also took Yu Yuemiao and Chan Xing Yan's storage pouches. Then, he shot out a few fireballs and destroyed their corpses. Only then did he activate the hibernating thunder escape technique and catch up to Xiang Yang and the rest. Xiang Yang naturally saw what Xiao Hua was doing, but he didn't have time to ask. He only focused on activating his transcendence energy, wanting to fly to Shihuang Town before Xiang Min arrived. Unfortunately, not to mention that Xue Xue and Yin Qinglian's hibernating thunder escape had just reached the entry level. Even if Xiang Yang used all of his magic power, his speed was still insufficient. Just as Xiao Hua frowned and wanted to stop the three of them so that he could use the bright thunder escape to fly away, the Buddhist sensed that Xiao Hua released from far away made a discovery. "Stop," Xiao Hua said decisively. "What's wrong?" Xiang Yang was stunned, but he began to slow down. "Quick, let's fly in reverse," Xiao Hua immediately ordered. Without waiting for the three of them to come to their senses, he slowed down again. With a clap of his hand, a flight talisman was placed on his body. Why? Why is that? Xiang Yang was completely stunned. "Husband, don't speak. Fly with junior brother Xiao." Yin Qinglian naturally didn't understand, but she knew that Xiao Hua's actions were reasonable. She hurriedly turned around and flew in front of Xiao Hua using an ordinary flight technique. Xiang Yang rubbed his head and watched as Xue Xue flew to Xiao Hua's side unswervingly. At the same time, he threw out a flying talisman and had no choice but to fly in front of Xiao Hua and the others. Sure enough, in just a short moment, a golden core cultivator's divine sense swept past Xiao Hua and the others, and his divine sense was filled with rage. Xiang Yang and the others knew that Xiang Min had arrived. They did not dare to delay and immediately stopped in midair, waiting for Xiang Min's arrival. In the time it took to brew a cup of tea, Xiang Min flew over at an extremely fast speed. Seeing Xiang Min's flushed little face and eyes that were about to spit fire, Xiang Yang's heart almost jumped out of his chest. "Greetings, Senior Xiang." Xiang Yang hurriedly bowed again, and Yin Qinglian and the others followed suit. "Did you come from Shihuang Town?" Xiang Min's figure suddenly stopped as she asked coldly. "Oh yes." Xiang Yang instantly understood what Xiao Hua was thinking, and he hurriedly bowed and replied, "Junior wants to bring these two junior brothers to Flame Forest Swamp to gain experience. I've just made some preparations in West Huang Town, and we're heading to Flame Forest Swamp. Did you see any golden core cultivators, or 3 or 4 cultivators, above the middle stage of Foundation establishment, rushing to Shihuang Town in front of I?" Xiang Min asked sharply. "Senior Xiang, please no. Junior and the others have not seen any cultivators on our way here," Xiang Yang said respectfully. Hearing that, Xiang Min did not say anything else and flicked her sleeves and flew in another direction. Seeing that Xiang Min's back was getting further and further away, Xiangyang and the other two still did not dare to speak. However, their eyes were filled with admiration. If it wasn't for great wisdom and great ability, who would dare to turn around and face the angry gold core cultivator when they knew that they had just killed the disciple of the gold core cultivator? Furthermore, at this critical moment, Changxing Yin had hurriedly sent out a transmission talisman and did not explain the situation in detail. Only when Xiang Min was far away did Xiang Yang dare to send a voice transmission. Junior brother Xiao, what should we do? Continue to flame forest swamp? According to Xiang Yang's thinking, since he had already seen Xiang Min and said that they were going to flame forest swamp, if he did not go, it would mean that he had a guilty conscience. He could only go and show that he did not know what was going on ahead. Unexpectedly, Xiaohua opened his mouth and said, Eldest senior brother, Senior Xiang warned us long ago. We wanted to get lucky and go to Flame Forest Marsh to gain experience, but we were still discovered by Senior Xiang. Fortunately, he was kind and didn't say anything. However, this is also a warning. We should obediently return. Xiang Yang was shocked. Of course, Xiang Min had already warned them. Just now, he was in a hurry and probably did not think about it. If they could not find the person, how could he not be angry with them? Wasn't this an excuse? If they did not leave now, when would they? Although they did not know what Xiaohua had discovered, Xiang Yang smiled bitterly and waved his hand seriously. Forget it, we also feel that we should turn back. When Martial Uncle Zhanyi comes, we'll talk about it again. The words Martial Uncle Zhanyi were heavily emphasized. Of course, Xiang Min was a golden core cultivator. Who knew if he had left any clues? Who knew if he could hear the words of the four people? Everything was just an act. We will listen to eldest senior brother's instructions. Xiaohua replied respectfully. Soon after, the three of them turned around and flew towards Shihuang town. At this time, Xiaohua and the others did not dare to reveal too much of their speed. They only dared to fly at about the same speed as before. Seeing that Shihuang town was not far away, Xiaohua and the others were about to reveal victorious smiles on their faces. Xiang Min's divine sense once again caught up to them, and a cold and indifferent voice was transmitted over. You all, stop right there. This is bad. Xiaohua's expression immediately changed. He knew that something was wrong. Xiaohua looked around, his heart filled with bitterness. If he was alone, he would definitely flee in panic. After all, he had entered Shihuang town's transportation array. The outside world was so big that he could be transported anywhere. Although Xiang Min had left, he definitely would not do anything to the disciples of Yinyuan City. But now, Xiaohua could only stand there with his hands by his side. He had no other thoughts. -8. Chapter 1874. Xiang Yang was also a little uneasy. He looked at Yin Qinglian and Xiaohua, nodded slightly, and also stood in the air. Not long after, Xiang Min flew over with a gloomy expression. He stared at Xiang Yang with a sharp gaze. Senior Xiang, do you have any instructions? Xiang Yang was afraid that Xiang Min would suddenly attack, so he quickly bowed and said, Junior remembered Senior's instructions and didn't dare to go forward. I want to return to Shihuang town and wait for my martial uncle. Your martial uncle? Which one? Xiang Min frowned and asked. Oh, it's my Thunderclap Palace's martial uncle Zhenyi. He'll be here soon. Xiang Yang said respectfully. Xiang Min's eyes narrowed as if he was measuring the authenticity of Xiang Yang's words. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Xiang Min said, Xiang Yang, have you seen I's two disciples? Xiang Yang frowned and thought for a moment, then smiled apologetically and said, Are they the two fellow Taoists who went through the teleportation formation with Senior that day? Yes, Xiang Min nodded. Xiang Yang shook his head and said, Senior Xiang, I haven't seen the two fellow Taoists since Junior left through the teleportation formation. Do you dare to swear a hard oath? Xiang Min said coldly. Xiang Yang smiled without hesitation and said, Of course I can. However, Senior Xiang and the two fellow Taoists, my two disciples sent out a message talisman, but they didn't say anything. Furthermore, I searched for the place where the message talisman was sent from, but I didn't see anything. When I tried to send out another message talisman, the message talisman couldn't be sent out. The more Xiang Min spoke, the angrier she became. Within a radius of several hundred miles, there isn't a fifth person other than the four of you. As he spoke, Xiang Min's face revealed a sinister grin. He waved his sleeves and formed a seal with both hands. A huge suction force formed from his hands and enveloped the four people. The suction force formed a confinement force, trying to imprison Xiang Yang and the others. Damn it, why do I ask so much? Why bother swearing a hard oath? Just search their souls or kill them. Xiang Min said coldly as he lowered his hand. Senior Xiang. Xiang Yang was shocked. He slapped his hand and took out the long spear from his storage bag. He pointed it at the sky, wanting to block the spell. Yin Qinglian's expression changed as well. She also took out her Dharma artifact, wanting to block the spell. However, both of them were only at the mid-stage of the Foundation establishment stage. Even with their magical weapons, they were no match for Xiang Min. Xiang Min's confinement technique fell upon them and extinguished all the lightning. Golden Core cultivators. Sure enough, their magic power is unfathomable. Xiaohua felt that the heaven and earth spiritual qi around him seemed to have been sucked dry, and he couldn't use any spells. He couldn't help but be greatly shocked. Although his current transcendence energy is already comparable to a late-stage Foundation establishment cultivator, after all, there is still a gap between true essence and true qi. Furthermore, the true essence of a late-stage Foundation establishment cultivator and the golden core of an Aurus core stage cultivator have an intrinsic difference. Looking at it this way, if Xiaohua goes against Xiang Min, there is absolutely no way he can win. What should I do? Xiaohua's mind spun rapidly. He raised his hand, wanting to slap his forehead and use whatever cloud-suppressing seal, whatever execution dream. He himself understood that this Xiang Min has always been unbridled. Just now, he even wanted to make a heart oath to Xiang Yang. After a few words, he wanted to directly search their souls. Perhaps after imprisoning the four of them, he wouldn't even search their souls and directly kill them. Yu Yuemiao and Chan Xingyan were his own handiwork. There is absolutely no reason for his senior brother and the others to be implicated. However, just as Xiaohua raised his head, a divine sense swept over from afar. That Xiang Min was also startled and swept his divine sense over. Like I said, without a golden core cultivator, how could my two disciples be killed so easily? Xiang Min's expression was sinister. His figure flew away, abandoning Xiaohua and the others, and flew towards the place where the divine sense swept over. However, although Xiang Min's person left, the confinement technique did not disappear. Xiaohua and the others were immediately confined. Without the support of transcendence energy, the four of them fell from the sky like rocks. Fortunately, the four of them had ulterior motives and did not fly high. Although the ground was full of rocks, they did not suffer too much damage. Just as Xiaohua's body landed on the ground, he heard a rumbling sound from afar. A multicolored brilliance shone, and there was also the continuous rumbling of thunder. Io, could it be that martial Uncle Zhenyi has come? Hearing the familiar sound of thunder and lightning, Xiang Yang's face unconsciously revealed a happy expression. Yin Qinglian also nodded, listening to the sound of magic and the lingering thunder and lightning. It should be my Imperial Thunder Sect's lightning magic. Didn't Senior Xiang also say that? The one who came as a golden core cultivator. It should be Martial Uncle Zhenyi without a doubt. Xiaohua was lying on the ground, looking like a dog eating shit. He was in a rather sorry state. Shui, on the other hand, was looking at him with bright eyes. What's there to look at? Xiaohua said with a smile. Is there a flower growing on my face? Hee, naturally there is a flower growing on your face. A Xiaohua, a little dog-tail flower. Shui's mouth slightly curled up, and her eyes revealed a mischievous look as she said with a smile. Your Langjun is a Xiaohua. Xiaohua's heart swayed, and he said with a smile. However, just as these words left his mouth, there was a boom in his mind, and there was a burst of clear cry. Xiaohua, Xiaohua, Xiaohua. I seem to be called Xiaohua? Shameless, Shui spat and said, You are a big man. What kind of flower is that? Only a woman like me, who is made of water, is a flower. But Xiaohua was in a daze. How could he hear it? Shui saw that Xiao Hua ignored her and anxiously said, Darling Xiao, darling Xiao. Xiao Hua came back to his senses with a somewhat bitter smile. Looking at Shui's anxious face, he said, I know. I fell from an ox, and you are that flower. Eh? What do you mean? What did you fall from an ox? Shui was stunned. She obviously didn't know. At this time, Xiang Yang's heart had already calmed down, but his face was still facing Xiao Hua, and he said loudly, There is a saying in the secular world, a flower inserted in cow dung. Junior sister Shui, I'm afraid you haven't heard of it before. Ha ha ha, Shui heard and laughed loudly. Her fragrant breath blew on Xiao Hua's face, making Xiao Hua feel quite comfortable. Speaking of which, junior brother Xiao, you are very proficient in the secular world. Xiang Yang said with a smile. This is also what I heard when I was young and was practicing martial arts with a martial master. Hee, senior brother. I also didn't expect that your martial arts are so good. Only now did Xiao Hua have time to think about Xiang Yang's martial arts. Last time when you exchanged pointers with me, you really went easy on me. However, what made Xiao Hua puzzled was that Xiang Yang didn't say anything and didn't answer a single word. Immediately, Xiao Hua realized that Xiang Yang was extremely unwilling to remember the past. Perhaps there were some sad past events. Thinking about how Xiang Yang never asked him about the situation when he was a rogue cultivator, Xiao Hua was also speechless. Hee, senior brother. You're right. Senior Xiang's two disciples were Foundation Establishment middle-stage cultivators, and they were actually killed in an instant, which senior, such a powerful person? It really makes me envious. I really don't know when I can cultivate to the Jindan realm. Xiao Hua quickly changed the topic. When Xiao Hua's words came out, not to mention Shui who was originally attached to Xiao Hua, even the heartbroken Xiang Yang was very happy in his heart. Yin Qinglian sighed, Junior brother Xiao, don't be distracted. The key for you now is Foundation Establishment. Only by Foundation Establishment can you have a chance to peek into the Jindan realm. Without Foundation Establishment, everything is just empty talk. Yin Qinglian's voice was deliberately rough, as if she was helpless. Senior sister, you don't need to use master to pressure me. Xiao Hua replied with a bitter smile, almost touching his nose with his hand. He will never reach Foundation Establishment. Xiang Min's cold voice sounded, and a pressure that made Xiao Hua feel suffocated pressed on the four people at the same time. Xiao Hua was shocked. At this moment, another pressure blocked Xiang Min, and a faint voice sounded. Fellow Daoist Xiang, they are all eyes juniors. How can you make things difficult for them? Soon after, Xiao Hua felt his body lighten. Xiang Min's confinement technique was broken. Xiao Hua flipped over and stood up. He flicked the gravel off his body and cried out in surprise, Grandmaster Zhan, you've finally come. Useless things. Zhan Ye's Taoist robe was a bit messy, but he still scolded without any trace of politeness. 2 Middle Foundation Establishment disciples, 2 Late Qi Refinement disciples, you 4 Imperial Thunder Sect disciples can't even withstand a single move from the 5 Elements Sect's Jindan Realm cultivators. You've really lost face for my Thunderous Palace. When we return to Imperial Thunder Sect, I'll punish you with 20 years of seclusion. Xiao Hua was overjoyed in his heart, and with a pitiful appearance, he looked at Xiang Min timidly and said in a low voice, Grandmaster Zhen, can I be punished with 200 years of seclusion? At this moment, Xiang Yang recovered his honest appearance and didn't have Xiao Hua's unruliness. He knew that Zhen Yi was mocking Xiang Min, but he still looked at Xiao Hua in confusion. Oh? Why? Obviously, Zhen Yi was also shocked and asked curiously, I'm afraid I'll have to cultivate for another 200 years before I can reach Senior Xiang's cultivation. Xiao Hua stammered and said hesitantly. Zhen Yi came to his senses and laughed loudly. Ha 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 ha, Xiang Yang, Yin Qinglian, and Shui wanted to laugh, but they didn't dare to. If they didn't laugh, they couldn't hold it in. Looking at them like that was really hard to bear. Xiang Min's previously tidy hair was now a bit messy, and her face was already ashen. Her small face was taut, and she sneered, Fellow Taoist Zhen, your Imperial Thunder Sect's disciples' cultivation isn't good, but his mouth is quite powerful. This is the first time I've seen a cultivator who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Ha ha ha, Zhenyi laughed and said, "These are my Imperial Thunder Sect's disciples. Not knowing the immensity of heaven and earth has always been their right. My Imperial Thunder Sect has plenty of disciples like this, and you can see as many as you want." Humph, Xiang Min flung her sleeves and sneered, "Fellow Taoist Jun, look after your disciples well. I'm going to find and kill that hateful murderer. If you're interested in my suggestion just now, you can send me a summoning talisman. I will naturally look after these 4 disciples well, and not let them be killed for no reason." Zhenyi had a smile on his face. "I still need to carefully consider fellow Taoist's suggestion. If possible, I'll send you a summoning talisman. Farewell," Xiang Min said, then turned around and left without cupping her hands. -8. Chapter 1875. "I won't see you off," Zhenyi also replied. After Xiang Min's figure disappeared, Xiang Yang and Yin Qinglian walked forward and bowed. "Greetings, Martial Uncle Zhenyi. If it weren't for Martial Uncle's arrival, we would have died in the hands of this bastard." "And get up." Zhenyi waved his sleeves and let the 2 of them get up. His gaze quickly turned to Xiaohua. Xiaohua and Xue also hurriedly went forward to make up for it. Zhenyi waved his sleeves and smiled. "Get up. I was in seclusion to refine pills. Although your message had already reached the sect, I told the boy not to receive any of your messages. Fortunately, when I saw the message, I immediately rushed over. Hee, I really didn't expect that you guys would actually meet Xiang Min. That's right, Grandmaster Zhen. It's all thanks to you coming." Juniors and the others were inexplicably restrained by Senior Xiang. "We really don't know what's going on." Xiaohua was so innocent. He was even more of a virgin than a pure virgin. This matter has nothing to do with you guys." Zhenyi didn't want to say anything more. He waved his hand and said, "You guys should quickly leave Flame Forest Marsh. This place is no longer suitable for you to gain experience." "Martial Ancestor Zhen," Xiaohua hurriedly said. Zhenyi clearly misunderstood Xiaohua and said with a smile, "Oh, Xiaohua, you passed the information about the lightning beast to this old man. This old man has already discussed it with Xiang Min. There are indeed lightning beasts in this flame forest swamp. You have already completed the task this old man entrusted to you. This old man will not punish you for the previous matters." Xiaohua cupped his hands and said, "Martial Ancestor Zhen is fair in rewards and punishments. However, I still have something I want to discuss with Martial Ancestor Zhen." "Oh?" Zhenyi frowned and said, "What else do you want?" Xiaohua glanced at the gloomy Xiang Yang and Yin Qinglian, then told Zhenyi about Xiang Yang's matter. "Humph, ignorant child." Zhenyi sneered and said, "Using the lightning beast's inner core to repair the damaged foundation of the lightning tribulation is just a legend. The repair method you know is just a conjecture created by the lightning controlling sect's ancestors. It hasn't been proven. You guys actually used the incomparably precious lightning beast's inner core to do this experiment. This really makes me speechless." Xiang Yang's expression became even more gloomy. Xiaohua smiled apologetically and said, "Since it was created by the seniors of our sect, there must be a reason for it. If we don't try it, how can we know it won't work? In eldest senior brother's situation, this is the only way." I'll give it a try." Zhenyi said indifferently, "That's easy for you to say. It's as if the Thunder Beast's inner core is a spirit stone. Xiaohua, do you know what this Thunder Beast's inner core means to this old man, to the cultivators of my Imperial Thunder Sect, to the Golden Core cultivators?" Xiaohua continued to smile apologetically. "Haha, this junior naturally knows that this item is extremely precious to Grandmaster, but to this junior's eldest senior brother, it involves his lifespan. This junior has no choice but to be bold and speak. Xiang Yang, in this old man's opinion, it's fine not to use the lightning beast's inner core." Zhenyi flicked his sleeves and said, "This old man saved all of you from Xiang Min's hands, and will send all of you to Western Huangtown's transportation array in a while. This can also be considered as fulfilling my duties as your master." "This old man, I'm afraid I can't agree to your request for no reason." Zhen Ye's words were extremely reasonable. Although the lightning beast's inner core involved Xiang Yang's lifespan, Xiang Yang wasn't Zhen Ye's disciple after all. Xiang Yang's life and death really had nothing to do with him. Zhen Yi didn't even bring his own trusted disciples with him this time, so he naturally had the intention to obtain the lightning beast's inner core. It could be seen how important this inner core was to him. How could he possibly share some with Xiang Yang? Even a method to repair one's Tao foundation without any basis? Grandmaster Zhen, this junior's eldest senior brother, only needs a little bit. Xiaohua stretched out his little finger and gestured. Xiaohua. Zhen Yi was slightly angry. This old man can see that you have a promising talent that suits this old man's taste. That's why I said a few words to you. Why do you have no sense of propriety? Even if your master is helpless, he still wouldn't dare to act so rashly. Junior brother Xiao. Xiang Yang was somewhat discouraged and said in a low voice, "We should leave Flame Forest Marsh. We shouldn't delay Marshal Uncle Zhen's matter." Xiaohua looked at his exceptionally loyal eldest senior brother and said with a smile, "Eldest senior brother, don't be anxious. Since you're this junior's eldest senior brother, you'll be this junior's eldest senior brother for the rest of my life. This junior won't dare to slack off in the slightest for eldest senior brother." Xiang Yang was admittedly a middle-stage foundation establishment cultivator, but the rims of his eyes instantly turned red. Xiaohua, this old man knows that you have deep feelings. These words have already been said in this old man's immortal's cave several years ago. Zhen Yi sighed. But this lightning beast's inner core is really important to this old man. This old man can't subdue the lightning beast by himself. Didn't you see? Xiang Min is also eyeing it covetously. Also, to tell you the truth, this old man has made an appointment with several other fellow Taoists. This old man still doesn't know how much I can get, so how can I promise you? Hee, Grandmaster Zhen, how can this junior make things difficult for Grandmaster? Xiaohua had already thought it through. He said with a smile, "If I can't do something for Grandmaster, how could I dare to say so much to Grandmaster?" "Oh, what do you mean?" Zhen Yi was slightly surprised, but soon after, he asked with interest. Xiaohua waved his hand and took out the Sun Moon Corona from the space. He said with an apologetic smile, "Grandmaster, please take a look. This is a magic tool that this junior obtained. It can detect the fire ape's movements. Presumably, Grandmaster already knows that the lightning beast is together with the fire ape. Relying on this magic tool, this junior can point out the lightning beast's movements to Grandmaster." "Is that so?" Zhen Yi said with a smile. "Tell this old man, where is the fire ape right now?" Xiaohua said with embarrassment, "This magic tool also needs to be within a certain range. Only then will it be effective. If this old man refines this magic tool, then the range, won't it be even larger?" Zhen Yi said with a soft smile. Xiaohua bit his lips. Looking at Zhen Ye's calm expression, he said with an apologetic smile, "This junior doesn't know. Junior's refinement method can disappear at any time." "Will you have the opportunity to make the refinement method disappear?" Zhen Ye's voice was still calm. Hee, something like drawing water with a bamboo basket. Grandmaster probably won't try." Xiaohua glanced at Xiang Yang and the others, whose expressions changed slightly, and said calmly, "Moreover, will Grandmaster give up the opportunity to let my Imperial Thunder sect have a larger share of the lightning beast's inner cores? Besides, maybe my eldest senior brother won't even need those inner cores?" Zhen Yi looked at Xiaohua as if he wanted to see through him. Xiaohua met Zhen Ye's gaze and didn't seem to avoid it. He still held the Sun Moon Corona in his hand, as if he wasn't afraid of Zhen Yi snatching it. The place was cold and desolate. Only the mountain wind was still blowing. Myriad Thunder Valley is fortunate to have a disciple like you. After a long while, Zhen Yi praised. "Many thanks for Grandmaster's help." Xiaohua was overjoyed and bowed in thanks. "All of you, follow this old man." Zhen Yi didn't say anything else. He waved his hand and flew up. -8. Chapter 1876. Xiaohua nodded at Xiang Yang. Xiang Yang also smiled, glanced at Yin Qinglian, and flew up first. Then, Yin Qinglian, Xiaohua, and Xue Xue also flew away. Zhen Ye's direction was Flame Forest Swamp, But after flying for a while, he turned back and looked at Xiao Hua, who was flying behind Xiangyang and Yin Qinglian, and said in a low voice, "Come here." "Yes, may I know why Grandmaster called for this disciple?" Xiao Hua didn't dare to be negligent. He flew past Xiangyang and smiled apologetically. "It's like this," Zhenyi said indifferently, "a few years ago." "Oh, it's already been more than 10 years, right? When you first entered my Imperial Thunder sect and made a mistake in the Eastern Ridge, I learned about the lightning beast from a fellow Taoist I was on good terms with. I made an appointment with a few Aurus Core cultivators to search for the lightning beast's whereabouts. Unfortunately, because of you, I wasn't able to go, and those fellow Taoists didn't look for me again. When I received your message, I immediately sent a message to those fellow Taoists, and one of them replied to me. They searched for the lightning beast but failed, and more than half of them died. This time, since I'm leading the search for the lightning beast, I naturally have to invite a few more friends to have some confidence. Previously, Xiang Min's goal wasn't the lightning beast, but the fire ape. Moreover, he also invited a few fellow Taoists. He suggested that we work together and divide the cores of the fire ape and the thunder beast equally. This way, he would be able to obtain the thunder beast's core for no reason, and I have no use for the fire ape's core at all. Therefore, I wasn't willing to work together with him. But the heavens are playing with us. Zhenyi smiled bitterly. That fire ape was actually together with the lightning beast. But it's also strange. How can these two kinds of spirit beasts be together? However, now that I think about it, it's because these two kinds of spirit beasts can be together that I can borrow your strength to get an extra 10%. Zhenyi mocked himself. The fire ape's core that you can get an extra share is mine, and I won't give it to you. Moreover, if Xiangyang can't finish using the lightning beast's core, you must also give it to me. Of course, I'll earn this share for you in front of everyone. This can also be considered a reward. Great, Xiao Hua said with a smile. Everything is according to Grandmaster's instructions. Junior just wants to ask for a bit of the lightning beast's inner core for eldest senior brother. Good. It's good that you understand. Listen to this old man's arrangement. Zhenyi nodded. However, he seemed to have thought of something and said, "Moreover, the lightning beast and the fire ape are both at the gold core stage. When we subdued the lightning beast last time, a gold core stage fellow Taoist fell. This time, the situation is even more serious than before. I can't guarantee your safety. If anything happens to you, I won't take responsibility." This, Xiao Hua laughed apologetically. "Grandmaster, please wait a moment." Xiao Hua hurriedly slowed down and discussed with Xiangyang and the others. In Xiao Hua's opinion, the three of them didn't need to go. He only needed to accompany Zhenyi. Unexpectedly, as soon as he spoke, Xiangyang shook his head and said, "Junior brother Zhao's words are wrong. Since this is my matter, how can I let you take the risk alone? If you don't let me go, then don't go either." Yin Qinglian smiled and said, "My cultivation is higher than your eldest senior brother's. Since he can go, I can go too." Shui was even more resolute. "Wherever you go, I will follow." Sigh. These words were not inferior to Fairy Hong Xia's. "Since you have decided, I will go with you." "Forget it." Before Xiao Hua could say anything, Zhenyi sighed. He clapped his hands and took out 2 talismans, handing them to Xiao Hua and said, "These are the escape talismans that this old man obtained. When you activate your transcendence energy, you can move several hundred feet in a short time. As for how far you can go, it all depends on your cultivation. This old man originally used them to protect himself. You and your fellow senior brothers have such deep feelings for each other. This old man is also moved. However, this old man only has these 2. As for who uses them and who doesn't, it's up to you." "Many thanks, Grandmaster." Xiao Hua laughed and scratched his head. "This is really too easy to distribute." With a flip of his hand, Xiangyang and Shui each had one. Shui wouldn't let Xiao Hua worry because of her shallow cultivation, so she naturally took it. Xiangyang also looked at Yin Qinglian's gaze and smiled as he received it. "Damn it, you fellow senior brothers are really strange." He still wanted to see how the 4 of them would decline modestly. Zhenyi helplessly shook his head. He couldn't understand the deep feelings and silent tacit understanding between Xiangyang and Yin Qinglian, as well as Xiao Hua and Xue Xue. Huh. Zhang Yi was shaking his head when he suddenly looked into the distance with a strange expression. What is it, Grandmaster? Xiao Hua didn't release his divine sense and asked in a low voice. It's a bit strange. Zhang Yi slightly frowned and said, Let's go and take a look. Xiao Hua and the others flew forward with Zhang Yi for a while and saw the corpses of several cultivators in a low-lying mountainous area. At first glance, these corpses were similar to the corpses of the several dozen cultivators that Xiao Hua and the others saw at the beginning. However, after Xiao Hua's divine sense swept over them, he understood that although these cultivators had fatal wounds on their bodies or vital parts, there were no traces of their heads being clawed open by the fire ape. Grandmaster. Xiao Hua was just about to speak when he thought about it. He hadn't been to the front, so how could he see the cultivators injured by the fire ape? He unconsciously stopped. What's wrong? Zheng Yi turned his head and said, Did you discover something? All right, Grandmaster knows, Xue Xue said. Before Disciple entered the sect, Disciple came to Flame Forest Marsh. The fire ape is the most vicious and eats human brains as food. If these cultivators were injured by the fire ape, there would definitely be obvious traces. These cultivators, I'm afraid they weren't injured by the fire ape. Disciple heard Junior Marshal Sister Xue mention this before. Xiao Hua quickly said. Zheng Yi didn't doubt this and said in a low voice, Xiao Hua, try and see if you can sense the fire ape's location. Grandmaster, please wait a moment. Xiao Hua didn't dare to be negligent and took out the Sun Moon Corona. Under the urging of his magic power, the Sun Moon Corona emitted a brilliant light. After a moment, Xiao Hua withdrew his magic power and shook his head. Disciple can't sense it. It shouldn't be nearby. There's still some distance from here to Flame Forest Marsh. Usually, the spirit beasts that can move around are all low-level and definitely wouldn't be so tyrannical. There's no lack of foundation establishment cultivators among these cultivators, so they wouldn't be so incompetent. Could it be that the spirit beasts of Flame Forest Marsh were driven out by the fire ape and lightning beast? Zheng Yi said with a slight frown. Grandmaster Zhen, these people's storage pouches are all gone. Xiao Hua was obviously the first to discover this and shouted in extreme shock. Seeing Xiao Hua reveal his true nature, Xiang Yang was truly somewhat helpless. He glared at Xiao Hua and then looked at Zheng Yi, but Zheng Yi merely nodded slightly. Either they were taken away by someone in passing, or they were killed by someone, Xiao Hua said fiercely. Clearly, his speculation was leaning towards the former. Let's continue forward. Zheng Yi flicked his sleeves and flew away. Xiao Hua looked, somewhat unable to bear it. Another dozen or so small sparks flew out and burned these people's corpses. Oh, Xiao Hua, you clearly have a guilty conscience from burning them. Could it be that you did it? Zheng Yi looked at the meddlesome Xiao Hua and asked curiously. All right, Grandmaster understands. Xiao Hua honestly told him about the secular world's matter of being buried for peace. He smiled apologetically and said, Disciple really can't bear to see innocent corpses exposed to the outside world. Admittedly, I've let down my parents and ancestors, but it's also inappropriate for them to be torn apart by those spirit beasts. It's better for them to return to dust and return to earth. What a bunch of nonsense. Zheng Yi shook his head, obviously extremely disapproving of Xiao Hua's point of view. With this kind of heart, the path of cultivation won't last long. Xiao Hua laughed and didn't say anything more. However, after flying towards the Flame Forest Marsh for the time it took to eat a meal, Xiao Hua and the others once again encountered dead cultivators. However, the number of dead cultivators this time was a lot less, only a few. However, the storage pouches that Xiao Hua was looking forward to were still missing. Strange. Xiao Hua almost stomped his feet. There's definitely something strange about this. But what was strange about it? Xiao Hua looked again and again, but didn't discover anything. It was just that the storage pouches were missing. Let's go. Zheng Yi didn't say anything further and flew towards the Flame Forest Marsh again. At first, the Flame Forest Marsh was similar to what Xiao Hua saw last time. It was filled with red gravel and rugged scarlet rock mountain ranges. However, as they flew further in, not only did it become hotter, but the spiritual energy of heaven and earth also gradually began to become tyrannical. Unstable spiritual energy existed from time to time, and there were even some areas that didn't have a trace of spiritual energy at all. Why is this situation similar to the Eastern Ridge Medicinal Garden from before? Xiao Hua's eyes spun wildly. Could it be that there's another fire origin here? Soon after, Xiao Hua had another idea in his mind. I found a fire origin, but I didn't make any progress in my cultivation. Although my bones have been tempered into a scarlet color, I still feel that it's not complete. What if I obtain another fire origin? Would it be beneficial to the light evasion technique? Xiao Hua's thoughts were extravagant. The fire origin was an innate object. It was already pretty good that there was even a little bit of it on the Dawn Rain continent. How could there be a second one? Moreover, the 5 elemental origins might not necessarily exist on the Dawn Rain continent. Xiao Hua still didn't understand the true meaning of the word origin. That's right. I've been practicing the Big Dipper Divine Fist all this time. It still feels like my bones are being tempered. I don't know what it should be like next, and what realm it should be. Xiao Hua pondered again. What he didn't know was that as he practiced the Big Dipper Divine Fist every day, the flow that was still tempering his bones had already shown traces of orange within the scarlet red. That orange was originally somewhat similar to red. Even if he saw it with his own eyes, he might not be able to tell the difference. Xiao Hua's mouth slightly curled as he was thinking. His body suddenly fell down. The magic power in his body actually froze, and he couldn't circulate it at all. Xiao Hua was caught off guard and was very flustered. However, just as he was about to fall to the ground, he felt his magic power flowing again. Not daring to be negligent, Xiao Hua hurriedly flew back into the air. Martial ancestors in this? With Zhenyi here, Xiao Hua naturally humbly asked for guidance, even though he knew a little about the Flame Forest Marsh. This is where the Flame Forest Marsh is extremely strange. Zhenyi said, there are many places that not only don't have the slightest bit of spiritual energy of heaven and earth, even the magic power in the body can't be used. This gives many cultivators an extreme headache, especially cultivators below the Jindan stage. -8. Chapter 1877. Xiao Hua rolled his eyes and smiled apologetically. Why? You're not a golden core cultivator. How would you know? Zhenyi glanced at him and said, a golden core cultivator's true yuan comes from their golden core. Their magic power can be replenished by the true yuan flowing out from their golden core at any time. Naturally, they are not afraid of a place like this that instantly seals their magic power. This is also the reason why cultivators below the golden core stage rarely come to the inner layer of the flaming forest swamp. If you suddenly lose your magic power above the lava, do you think you'll live or die? This disciple understands. Xiao Hua said respectfully, if it was this disciple, I'm afraid I'd be buried in the sea of fire. Therefore, Grandmaster, please take care of this disciple and the rest. Hehe, if you're afraid, just give that magic tool to this old man. Zhenyi raised his eyebrows and laughed. Xiao Hua lowered his head and looked at the situation below him that was completely different from the outer layer of the flaming forest swamp. He did not reply. Zhenyi did not think it was strange. He smiled lightly and continued to fly forward. At this time, the sky above the flaming forest swamp was filled with rising steam and mist. It was like the surface of a boiling water, blocking everyone's vision. Furthermore, the ground below Xiao Hua and the rest were no longer crimson red sand and mountains. Instead, it was replaced by fire lakes that were tens of zhang, hundreds of zhang, and even hundreds of zhang in size. These fire lakes were densely covered with dark brown magma. From time to time, bubbles of various sizes would surge out from the magma, emitting gurgling sounds as the magma flowed like water. In between the fire lakes, there were sharp stone pillars that stood erect like barbs, covering the entire ground. Those stone pillars were like trees in the forest. This flaming forest swamp really lived up to its name. Thinking back to how Kaizhuxia had explained to him with a smile on her face, Xiao Hua could not help but feel a little sad. Her temperament was different from Fairy Hongxia's, and her appearance was similar. Xiao Hua then thought back to the sweet moments he had with Fairy Hongxia. Xiaohua could not help but think to himself, I wonder how Li Zongbao is doing now. Looking at his situation, he seems to have seen through the ways of the world. Although his cultivation has improved, his temperament is, boom. In the distance, there was a tall red mountain range in front of everyone. In front of the mountain range were several hundred zhong-wide fire lakes. Suddenly, a pillar of flame shot out from one of the fire lakes and soared high into the sky. Then, it fell down like fireworks. When it fell down, some of the fire blocks had already condensed, and some were still in liquid form. The range of the fire was extremely large. After a long while, these things fell into the lake, splashing up a lot of lava. Hiss! Xiaohua sucked in a breath of cold air. He glanced at Xiangyang and said in a low voice, Eldest senior brother, the pillar of fire in front of us that soars into the sky. Is it also one of the dangers of flame forest marsh? Xiangyang smiled bitterly and nodded. That's right. This fire pillar was born out of nowhere in the fire lake. Even if one's divine sense were to constantly scan the surface of the lake, one would not be able to detect it in advance. One can only rely on one's vigilance and defensive measures. This is really troublesome. Xiaohua secretly shook his head and looked at Zhenyi. Zhenyi did not say anything and continued to fly towards the fire pillar. In the time it took to eat a meal, Xiaohua had already arrived in front of the red mountain range with Zhenyi. When they flew past the mountain range, Xiaohua saw an endless white fog in front of him. From time to time, there was also a sound similar to that of a cow mooing. Along with the mooing sound, there was also a bright light coming from the distance. It was clearly the same as the fire pillar that soared into the sky just now. Xiaohua carefully looked at the fire lake again. At this time, the fire lake was different from before. Not only was the area of the fire lake several times larger, the color of the lava was also much brighter. What shocked Xiaohua the most was that within the lava, there were actually many lively fire rats. Those fire rats were like small fish in the lake, swimming in the magma. Occasionally, a few of them would jump out and land on the stone pillars on the ground. The magma dripping from the fire rats' bodies dripped down like water droplets, condensing into dark brown beads, while the fire rats revealed their glossy fur. Good heavens, these fire mice are actually not afraid of the lava. Xiaohua's eyes lit up as he thought to himself, the fur of these fire mice must also be precious. Unfortunately, just as Xiaohua thought of this, the fire mice in the fire lake sensed the movements of Xiaohua and the others. Pairs of mouse eyes swept towards the mountain range. Immediately after, there was a series of tang-tang-tung sounds, and almost all of the fire mice drilled into the lava and disappeared. They were really as timid as mice. You all be careful. Take out any defensive yellow talismans or spirit talismans. Zhenyi indifferently instructed and flew forward again, not even looking at the fire mice in the fire lake. Yes, this disciple understands. Xiangyang obviously also knew the dangers involved. He clapped his hands and took out several high-level defensive yellow talismans, handing them over to Xiaohua and the others. The myriad Thunder Valley was still relatively poor, and Xiangyang also didn't have any spirit talismans. Although Yin Qinglian knew how to refine spirit talismans, she didn't have the materials. Even the invisibility talisman could only be refined with Xiaohua's materials. Xiaohua also didn't say anything. He took the yellow talismans and slapped them on his body. Then, he pulled Shui and flew forward with Zhenyi. That's right, following behind a golden core cultivator, they definitely wouldn't suffer any losses. Unfortunately, just as they flew forward for the time it took to eat a meal, they heard a wong-wong sound coming from midair. Xiaohua had just released his divine sense when a kind of fluctuation even denser and stronger than his divine sense rushed over. It followed Xiaohua's divine sense and rushed into his Naiwen palace. Xiaohua was greatly shocked. The Buddha Saraira above his Naiwen palace immediately flashed with golden light, trying its best to resist this invading fluctuation. Zhenyi coldly snorted. He flung his sleeve, and a ray of light flashed, blocking Xiaohua and the others. That fluctuation was immediately blocked outside the light. Xiaohua then heard Zhenyi say, "These are fire bats. They are very sensitive to divine sense. You actually dared to use divine sense. As expected, the ignorant are fearless. Fire bats? Xiao Hua's face was slightly ashamed. When he looked as far as he could, sure enough, within the white fog, a red light flashed. A large scarlet cloud flew over, and within that cloud were fist-sized fire bats. Damn it, Xiao Hua was a bit ashamed and angry for his carelessness. He secretly said, if I wasn't afraid of revealing my strength, would I be afraid of them? Not to mention the dream executioner, even the cloud-suppressing seal can take care of them. Let's go. These fire bats are only second-rank spiritual beasts. If they weren't able to attack divine sense, they would be just like fire mice. As long as you don't release your divine sense, they won't be able to hurt you. Zhenyi saw Xiao Hua's unwillingness and said with a smile. His figure didn't stop at all, and he rushed into the group of fire bats. Sure enough, those fire bats repeatedly attacked the light surrounding Xiao Hua and the others. There were even a dozen that rushed towards Zhenyi. Not to mention the light protecting Xiao Hua and the others. That was Zhan Ye's magic. If it was broken by the fire bats, how could Zhenyi still be worthy of being called a golden core cultivator? And the dozen fire bats that rushed towards Zhenyi caused Xiao Hua to be astonished. -8. Chapter 1878. What do you think? Because when these fire bats rushed to Zhan Ye's body, his body immediately flashed with a faint purple brilliance. That purple brilliance also had tiny lightning bolts, which blocked the fire bats. These were second-grade spirit beasts with the strength of Foundation establishment, but they were actually easily blocked by this brilliance. This doesn't seem to be a defensive yellow talisman. Xiao Hua looked at it for a moment and concluded, a defensive yellow talisman's brilliance wouldn't flash so continuously. Moreover, it flashes somewhat in advance. It seems that the brilliance flashed in advance before the fire bats hit it. It's as if this brilliance has a reaction. Xiao Hua knew how to refine yellow talismans and spirit talismans, so he was very sensitive to these details. Soon after, he looked at the brilliance protecting him and asked Xiangyang, eldest senior brother, the defensive brilliance around Grandmaster Zhenye's body is very strange. This little brother thinks it's strange, but I don't know what to pay attention to. Xiangyang didn't find it strange that Xiao Hua suddenly had a problem, but he admired Xiao Hua for being able to see the difference in Zhan Ye's defensive brilliance. He smiled and said, Junior brother Xiao, you don't know, but this is the defensive brilliance of a gold core cultivator. It's different from ordinary defensive yellow talismans and spirit talismans. Defensive brilliance? Xiao Hua immediately said in surprise, what is this thing? Didn't Grandmaster Zhenyi say just now? From the gold core stage onwards, all the movement of true essence is initiated from the gold core and nascent soul in the Dantian. This defensive brilliance is one of the divine abilities of a gold core cultivator. A gold core cultivator can rely on the true essence in his gold core to lay down a layer of brilliance around his body, blocking attacks such as magic arts. Xiao Hua sucked in a breath of cold air. He immediately understood the key point. This defensive brilliance is a gold core divine ability. It's more powerful than all the yellow talismans. It's most effective in dealing with sneak attacks. Xiangyang said again, moreover, as long as the gold core doesn't break, this defensive brilliance can be used. Unless one's cultivation is stronger than a gold core cultivator, it's hard to break. Xiao Hua's face had a bitter smile. He was really rejoicing for himself. Previously, he wanted to sneak attack Xiang Min. Now it seemed that even if his attack power was extremely strong, as long as Xiang Min's gold core didn't break, the defensive brilliance would naturally appear. His sneak attack definitely wouldn't work. Realm. Realm. Xiao Hua once again understood the pain of helplessness. Seeing the bitterness in Xiao Hua's eyes, Xiangyang said a few more words. For cultivators below the Jindan stage, if their cultivation is a bit higher than those of the same stage, they will have the opportunity to kill others. However, the higher the Jindan stage, Yuanying stage, and even spirit-severing stage cultivators, even if their strength is a bit higher than those of the same stage, if they don't have any special abilities, it will be very difficult for them to kill those of the same stage. This protective light is also one of the reasons. I understand. Xiao Hua nodded. This is the so-called easy to defeat, but hard to kill. That's right. Xiangyang nodded. Just as Xiao Hua was transmitting his voice to Xiangyang, Zhenyi stretched out both of his hands, and countless faint purple lightning bolts shot out from between his fingers. Like a large lightning net, it spread out for several tens of meters and enveloped the swarm of fire bats that were charging over. Chirp, 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 a wave of fire bats' hurried cries rang out. All of the fire bats were surrounded by lightning bolts, and they no longer had the power to fly. They all fainted and fell into the fire lake. Within the fire lake, several hundred fire rats suddenly appeared. As if they had seen a delicacy, they bared their teeth and fought over the fainted fire bats. For a moment, filthy blood splashed everywhere, and small white bones scattered. In a short moment, the fainted fire bats were devoured by the numerous fire rats, and the fire rats quickly disappeared into the fire lake. Hearing the squeaking noises that had just started, followed by an extremely quick silence, Xiao Hua's heart throbbed. Of course, if the fire bats were like this, then needless to say, cultivators were even more so. As long as they lost their resistance and fell into the fire lake, they would immediately be devoured by the fire rats, and not even a bone would be left behind. No wonder this flame forest swamp was not a place where ordinary cultivators could come. Seeing Xiao Hua like this, Xue Xue's face was even more snow-white. Seeing this, Xiao Hua reached out and held Xue Xue's ice-cold hand. Xue Xue's hand was actually trembling, as if she was extremely scared. Sigh, I was still a bit careless, Xiao Hua said inwardly. Although Xue Xue is a female cultivator, she is still a girl after all. These fire rats, fire bats, and other disgusting spirit beasts have an innate fear. Wife, why don't we turn back? Xiao Hua transmitted his voice. The word wife caused Xue Xue's face to redden. She forced a smile and said, this is related to Senior Marshal Brother's life. This lowly concubine should follow Xiao Hua. We can't delay important matters just because this lowly concubine is scared. Moreover, is there any place in this world that is safer than Xiao Hua? Xiao Hua's hand tightened to express his comfort. He then looked at Yin Qinglian, who was also holding her hand. Men, although sometimes their cultivation was insufficient, at crucial moments, they would still rise to the occasion. We'll go over there and wait. Zhenyi easily killed the fire bat in one fell swoop. He pointed his finger at the fire lake in front of them to the left. In the fire lake, there was a small mountain peak that rose from the magma, and it was several hundred feet tall. When Xiao Hua and Zhenyi landed on the mountain peak, they could clearly see that the mountain peak was flat. The mountain peak was several hundred feet tall, and there weren't too many protruding rocks. It was very suitable for resting. When Zhenyi landed on the mountain peak, he didn't say anything else and closed his eyes to rest. When Xiao Hua and the others saw this, they didn't dare to say anything. Yin Qinglian accompanied Xiangyang, and Xue Xue accompanied Xiao Hua. They each found an empty place and sat down cross-legged. With Zhenyi and the others around, Xiao Hua didn't dare to refine the fire marrow flame crystal in his meridians. He could only continue to circulate his heart technique and let the fire attribute spiritual chi of heaven and earth from outside his body enter his body, refining it bit by bit. Xiao Hua hadn't used this method for a long time. When he picked it up now, he felt as slow as an old ox plowing the field. After a long time, Xiao Hua gradually became impatient. This method of drawing spiritual chi into his body was too slow. The hard work he did this time was far inferior to the refining of the fire marrow flame crystal. Sigh, Xiao Hua sighed. His gaze looked at the fiery red and pale white around him, and he closed his eyes again. This time, he truly calmed his heart and circulated the prairie fire heart technique bit by bit, guiding the tyrannical fire attribute spiritual chi into his meridians. Then, he circulated the fire attribute spiritual chi in his meridians, refining it bit by bit according to the heart technique. Along with the formation of strands of true chi, Xiao Hua also entered a rather empty state. It seemed to be devoid of joy and sorrow, yet it also seemed to be devoid of desires and desires. The refinement of true chi was nothing more than a natural reaction. The meticulous refinement process allowed Xiao Hua to have a deeper understanding of the prairie fire cultivation method, and the subtleties of the cultivation method were gradually revealed. The so-called prairie fire heart technique, as the name implied, took the meaning that a single spark could set a prairie ablaze. This cultivation method was admittedly crude, but its fine details were marvelous. Unfortunately, Xiaohua only valued the meridians of this cultivation method and had little understanding of this cultivation method. He only believed that it was like an old ox swallowing peonies, pouring a huge amount of fire marrow flame crystal into it. Xiaohua's spiritual qi had increased, but this increased spiritual qi could be practiced by any foundation establishment cultivation method. It was far from the essence of the prairie fire heart technique. At this time, under Jin Ye's deterrence, Xiaohua used the most basic method to circulate the heart technique for the first time. Under meditation, he actually comprehended the essence of the cultivation method. Unknowingly, 10 days had passed. Although Xiaohua's cultivation didn't make much progress, what he gained was far from simple. Previously, this young master was wrong. Xiaohua came out from his meditation and sighed inwardly. Every cultivation method has its own uniqueness. If I don't carefully comprehend it and only focus on the speed of refining spiritual qi, I'll be neglecting the essentials. Let's not talk about the prairie fire heart technique for now. After I reach foundation establishment, I'll have to practice the cultivation method given by master first. Speaking of foundation establishment, the fire marrow flame crystal has already been used up. What about the cultivation after foundation establishment? Directly refining spiritual qi of heaven and earth will admittedly allow me to comprehend the cultivation method and lay a good foundation. But what about after that? Will I still have to use other methods? Xiaohua thought again. Since I've arrived at Flame Forest Marsh, this young master can't help but look around to see if I can get some more fire marrow flame crystals. For foundation establishment cultivation. Thinking of this, Xiaohua frowned slightly. In addition, these 10 days of cultivation, admittedly I've comprehended a lot, but it's also somewhat inappropriate. This prairie fire heart technique's refinement of fire attribute spiritual qi is simply slower than when I was at the first or second level of qi refining. Moreover, there's actually some stagnation in the circulation of the cultivation method. It's far from the smoothness of refining fire marrow flame crystals in the past. If I hadn't calmed my heart and comprehended it today, this young master wouldn't have been able to detect it. What's going on? Right at this moment, a crimson communication talisman flew over from the fog in the distance and landed directly in front of Zhenyi. Zhenyi opened his eyes and reached out to grab the communication talisman. He scanned it with his divine sense and laughed. Hee, these old farts have finally come. As he spoke, he clapped his hand. The communication talisman whistled again and flew away in a different direction. Immediately after, Zhenyi stood up and looked around. He clapped his hand and took out another communication talisman. He laughed and said, "Now is the time to bargain with this little thief." Soon after, the communication talisman flew into the air and made a turn in the air, flying in another direction of Flame Forest Marsh. Seeing Zhenyi stand up, Xiaohua and the others didn't dare to continue cultivating. They also stood up and looked in the direction of the communication talisman, quietly waiting for the arrival of Xiang Min and the cultivators that Zhenyi had invited. The four of them were somewhat nervous. After all, the people who had come were all Golden Core Realm seniors, and what Xiang Yang wanted was tantamount to pulling a tooth from the tiger's mouth. They didn't know if Zhenyi could snatch an extra portion from their mouths. Flame Forest Marsh was so big, and the cultivators who came here to gain experience were far from the likes of Xiang Min and Zhenyi. In the other direction where the two communication talismans flew, above a huge fire lake several hundred kilometers away, a huge fire lion with countless tiny flames lingering around its body flew over from the distance. On top of this fire lion sat a late Foundation Establishment Realm old man with an ordinary build and a red face. This old man's eyes were slightly closed, and the half-foot beard under his chin was very conspicuous. -8. Chapter 1879. When the cultivator rode the fire lion to the fire lake, he patted the fire lion's forehead. The fire lion docilely stopped and shook its head. It took a deep breath, and a large amount of fire spiritual energy entered the fire lion's mouth. Then, the fire lion raised its head and let out a long roar. The fire rats that were scurrying around in the fire lake immediately disappeared into the lava and did not dare to show their faces again. Hee. The cultivator opened his eyes and looked at the fire lion lovingly. He stroked the fire lion's mane and got down from the fire lion's back. He released his spiritual sense and looked around carefully. He frowned and muttered, "This should be the place. Why can't I see anything? Strange." Then, the cultivator seemed to be unwilling to give up. He walked around for a long time within 1,000 feet radius. When he returned to his original place, the doubt on his face disappeared. He smiled and said, "This is the secret technique of the seniors in my sect. If I can understand it, I'm afraid I'm at the gold core stage." As he said that, he clapped his hands and took out a red talisman. Just as he was about to activate his spiritual power, he suddenly raised his head and looked to the right. Not long after, a dozen or so peak chi condensation disciples arrived from the direction the cultivator was looking at. When they saw the cultivator from afar, their faces were filled with reverence as they hastily flew over. When they got closer, the dozen disciples all bowed and greeted. "Greetings, Martial Uncle Miao Jun. Get up, everyone." The late-stage Foundation establishment cultivator called Miao Jun waved his hand and nodded. "Did you all bring the things?" "Martial Uncle Miao, we followed martial ancestors' instructions and brought the things." A slightly older disciple cupped his hands and said, "Hee, Martial Uncle Miao, don't worry." Another disciple beside this disciple smiled and said, "Although there are cultivators who come here to train, they are all on the other side. This place is very remote, and there aren't any powerful spiritual beasts. It's not suitable for training." You're right, but we can't let our guard down. This concerns the secret of the rise of the spirit husbandry sect. If anything goes wrong, we will all be sinners of the spirit husbandry sect." Miao Jun sneered. "I understand." The disciple's expression changed slightly, and he quickly bowed. "Yes." Miao Jun nodded and said, "You've worked hard. When this matter is settled and our black spirit sect obtains the mystery, I'm afraid your cultivation will also improve. At that time, the Foundation establishment stage will be within reach. Wouldn't that be wonderful?" "Haha, many thanks, Martial Uncle Miao." All the disciples were overjoyed. Seeing that Miao Jun was happy, one of the clever disciples smiled and said, "Previously, the sect sent out a secret order saying that there is a great secret to reaching the Foundation establishment stage in the vicinity of the Flame Forest Swamp. They only told us to search for it, but didn't tell us what the secret was. After searching for several years, we finally found this place." That's right, that's right." The disciples echoed. "What? Are you a little unhappy?" Miao Jun's face was cold. "Didn't the elders of the sect say that they were unhappy? Didn't he tell you the truth?" Disciple doesn't dare. That disciple wanted to flatter, but he had exposed such a big flaw. He hurriedly waved his hand. You have to understand. Foundation establishment cultivators like us can train in the Flame Forest Swamp, but if there are too many of us, how can we not attract the attention of cultivators from other sects? You are peak chi refining disciples, and you are looking for the opportunity to reach the Foundation establishment stage. Even if you come to the Flame Forest Swamp, no one will say anything. That's why the elder made such an arrangement. As for why he only told you that there is a secret to reaching the Foundation establishment stage and didn't tell you the specific reason, do you still need me to explain?" Miao Jun scolded. Yes, I know." The shrewd-looking disciple from before immediately said, "Our cultivation is shallow. If we were to be captured by cultivators from other sects, not to mention the soul-searching technique, I'm afraid that even if we were to survive, we would still have to reveal this secret. The elders' arrangement is to protect us and the secret of the sect." "It's good that you know." Miao Jun nodded. Even so, there were many cultivators from other sects who came here a few years ago. Furthermore, the dust-separating beast is getting harder and harder to find. Tell me, if this secret isn't known by others, what other reason could there be? Yes. The disciples didn't dare to refute and could only smile. "Let's talk about it again." Miao Jun turned his head again and looked around. He put on a fake smile and said, "I also just received the specific news even later than all of you. I thought that they were tracking the fire apes and other spiritual beasts that suddenly appeared in the flame forest swamp. I originally wanted to invite some good friends from other sects to come to the flame forest swamp, who knew that the elders had other arrangements. If I really invited my good friends, it would be difficult. Miao Jun and Qian Yuming weren't core disciples of the spirit husbandry sect. They didn't know many secrets in time. Miao Jun's words were obviously to vent his dissatisfaction. The disciples understood in their hearts, but they didn't dare to reply. Let's go. Let's not waste time. Miao Jun activated the spiritual talisman in his hand, which then turned into a ball of exquisite flame. Miao Jun swung his arm and threw it into the air. When the flame landed on the magma of the fire lake, a scarlet radiance flashed. Closely after that, ripples started to spread out from the fire lake. Furthermore, the ripples started to move upwards. In an instant, a huge oval-shaped hole appeared about 100 feet above the lava. Looking from the hole, a mountain that was over 100 feet tall could be seen. This mountain peak was exactly the same as the one Xiaohua and the others were on. They both rose up from the fire lake, but the height was much shorter. Moreover, this mountain peak was covered with many caves, and each cave was guarded by either aura refining or foundation establishment cultivators. Even after Miao Jun led the aura refining disciples into the concealment formation of the mountain peak, a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator flew over without waiting for the big cave behind them to completely recover. Greetings, Senior Brother Gao Chong. Seeing the cultivator fly over, Miao Jun didn't dare to be negligent and hurriedly cupped his hands in greeting. The Qi refinement disciples also bowed and greeted Martial Uncle Gao. Gao Chong scanned with his divine sense and said coldly, "Why did you come so late?" "Yes, Martial Uncle knows. We took something from the sect and came here through the transportation formation. However, because we wanted to hide it, we took a detour, so—" The quick-witted disciple was very anxious and hurriedly explained. Gao Chong's expression didn't change. He pointed at a few disciples and said, You, take out your identity tablets." Yes. The disciples who were pointed out didn't dare to be negligent and quickly took out their identity tablets respectfully. Gao Chong scanned with his divine sense and nodded. "Go and contact your senior brothers and junior brothers. Quickly get to work." Yes, the disciples answered in unison. First, they flew to the top of the mountain together. Then each sent out their summoning talismans. Seeing that the Qi refinement disciples had left, Miao Jun smiled and said, "Senior Brother Gao, go on your patrol. I'm going too." "Wait a moment," Gao Chong said coldly. "You still haven't answered the question I asked just now. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for it." -8. Chapter 1880. What? Miao Jun was obviously taken aback. "I just asked why you came so late." Gao Chong no longer showed any mercy and asked coldly, I just received a message from the sect and got the talisman to enter and exit." Miao Jun obviously didn't expect Gao Chong to ask such a question and couldn't help but panic. Gao Chong stared at Miao Jun for the time it took to drink half a cup of tea. Then, he said, "According to the elders' arrangements, you mid-foundation establishment disciples should have arrived here yesterday. Everyone else has already arrived. Even if they were late, they should have arrived by at least an hour. You, on the other hand, are actually late by a day. If it weren't for the fact that the formation needs manpower, this old man would never have let you in." I did have something else to do. I hope Senior Brother Gao can forgive me." Miao Jun heard Gao Chong's tone soften and hurriedly smiled apologetically. "Forgive?" Gao Chong glanced at the storage bags in front of Miao Jun and said with a smile, "Junior Brother Miao, do you think I don't know what you're doing if you don't say it yourself?" When the elders issued the sect order, they clearly said that this matter is of great importance. Remember to be cautious and don't get into trouble. Before the sect order, I naturally won't care. You can invite any friends or subdue any spirit beast. That's your freedom, and it's also in line with the sect's intention to conceal it. However, after the sect order, if you do anything strange and use your fire lion to kill other cultivators, then it's your fault. Yes, it's all my fault. Miao Jun was sweating profusely and didn't say anything else. He untied the storage bags from his waist and handed them to Gao Chong, begging, "I know senior brother Gao cherishes your friends the most. I saw a few cultivators from other sects who didn't know the severity of the matter and wanted to come here. I was afraid they would ruin the sect's plans, so I cut them off. It's all my fault. Now that I heard senior brother Gao's words, I know I made a mistake. I got these from those cultivators. I'll deal with them." Humph. Gao Chong reached out and took the storage bags. He snorted again. "Did you deal with the bodies of those cultivators?" Miao Jun was stunned and stammered, No. I was afraid I was late and didn't have time to deal with them." "Idiot," Gao Chong scolded. Miao Jun argued, however, it was all done by the Fire Lion, so no one should suspect anything. "I'm afraid there are other cultivators behind you, and you can't deal with them in time," Miao Jun said embarrassedly. "Senior brother Gao is wise. Go." Gao Chong waved his hand. Miao Jun's heart relaxed, and he clasped his hands and hurriedly flew away. After Miao Jun flew far away, Gao Chong sneered and said, "A bunch of idiots. Seeing a storage bag, they're like flies seeing blood, forgetting everything. Yesterday they were in groups, and today they're one by one. It's really unwise." After he finished speaking, he used his divine sense to check the place where Miao Jun opened the magic array. The entire magic array was restored, and a faint red light curtain enveloped the entire mountain peak. It was as if the horizon was red, and this red light curtain even went deep into the fire lake, separating the magma from the mountain peak. After Gao Chong finished his inspection, he didn't find anything wrong, so he flew in another direction. Miao Jun flew far away and landed on a spot on the mountain peak. He turned back and saw Gao Chong flying away and cursed, "Bad luck." Then he slapped his hand and took out a communication amulet. Under the power of his transcendence energy, the communication amulet flew down the mountain peak and flew into one of the caves. Not long after, another ray of light flew out from the cave, and behind the light was a spirit beast that looked like a fire bird. Miao Jun took the communication amulet and used his divine sense to scan it. The chirping fire bird flew in front of him and landed on his shoulder with familiarity. Miao Jun reached out and took out a spirit pill. The firebird nimbly took the spirit pill, then flapped its wings and flew up from Miao Jun's shoulder, flying back to the cave from which they came. Naturally, Miao Jun's figure also flew up and followed the firebird into the cave. The walls of the cave were filled with cooled magma, and ripples appeared on the stone walls. There were even some places where the outline of a fire mouse could be seen. The interior of the cave was still hot, but there was no fog. There were no bright flower stones on the stone walls, but there was still a faint red glow. There was a faint sound of wind, but under the flapping of the firebird's wings, it was somewhat unreal. Miao Jun flew behind the firebird, following the path of the cave. The path of the cave was somewhat messy, and there were forks from time to time. Moreover, the forks looked the same, so it wasn't easy to identify. Miao Jun tried to release his divine sense, but it was blocked after passing a foot through the stone walls. Moreover, it was limited inside the cave, and he couldn't go very far. Miao Jun patiently followed the firebird through countless turns, and he didn't know how deep they had descended from the fire lake. When they passed by a stalactite-sized crimson flame pillar, Miao Jun's body unconsciously came to a halt. An inconceivable expression, or perhaps one that he had never seen before, flashed across his eyes. This was a huge space, and it was 1,000 feet wide. The area was even larger, and it was probably thousands of feet wide. Miao Jun was only at a small opening in the stone wall, and there were many more openings like this on the stone wall. Looking at the ground of the space, there was an irregular-shaped altar. The altar was about 10 feet high, and there were many cultivators standing on it. In midair above the altar, there were also many cultivators, and these cultivators were doing different things. The cultivators on the altar didn't have high cultivation, and most of them were at the peak of the qi refining realm. Only a few of them were at the early stage of the foundation establishment realm. They each held a storage bag in their hands, and from time to time, they took out things from the storage bag and placed them on the altar. Then, they activated their spiritual power and cast a spell. If the spell was effective, these cultivators took out other things and placed them in other places. If the spell was ineffective, these cultivators took out other things and placed them in their original places. These objects were either oval or flat, and in short, there were different rules. The cultivators in midair above the altar held jade slips that they didn't use, and they stood at different positions. On one hand, they were monitoring the actions of the disciples on the altar, and on the other hand, they were sending their spiritual will into the jade slips, as if they were comparing them. When Miao Jun entered, most of the places on the altar had already been repaired by the disciples of the spirit husbandry sect. A weird-looking pattern had basically appeared on the altar. This pattern was pentagonal, and there were some smooth curves at the edges. In the middle of the curves, there was a pair of wings on its back, and its body was similar to a jackal in the mortal world. However, this jackal's head was huge, and it was more than half the size of its body. Although it hadn't taken shape yet, the ferocity in the jackal's eyes made Miao Jun's spiritual will tremble. Junior Martial Brother Miao. A mid-stage Foundation establishment cultivator hovered in mid-air with the firebird perched on his shoulder. He called out, "Hurry up and come help us. Our mission is very important. If we're delayed, the sect will punish us severely." "Yes, Senior Brother Shou, I understand." Miao Jun didn't dare to delay and quickly flew to Senior Brother Shou's side. Senior Brother Shou clapped his hands and took out a jade slip. He pointed to a place about 100 feet to the left and said, "On this altar, there is a formation set up by the ancestors of the spirit husbandry sect. As it has been abandoned for many years, it has lost its effectiveness. However, the spirit husbandry sect still has the materials used to set up the formation, and the entire formation is divided into hundreds of parts. You are in charge of that part, and just make sure that the formation repaired by the disciples matches the one recorded in your jade slip. You don't have to worry about whether it is useful or not." "Yes, I understand." Miao Jun seemed to have some understanding of formations, and immediately understood what Senior Brother Shou meant. However, when he scanned the jade slip in his hand with his spiritual will, he was stunned. He rolled his eyes and said in a low voice, "Senior Brother Shou, the formation in this jade slip seems to be incomplete. Moreover, although I can't see the formation, just a small part of it, from what I can see, it is still very important." Hearing this, Senior Brother Shou's face turned serious, and he said in a low voice, "Junior Brother Miao, I know that you are good at formations, but you don't have to show off in front of me. Moreover, this is the arrangement of the elders. If you don't want to live anymore, I will report this to the elders." Miao Jun's face turned slightly yellow, and he said hurriedly, "Senior Brother Shou, I was just saying, don't take it seriously." After he finished speaking, Miao Jun took the jade slip and flew to the place that Senior Brother Shou had mentioned. As he immersed his spiritual will in the jade slip, he guided the disciples on the altar on how to cast the formation. "Elder Yuan, this Spirit Awakening 5 Skundas formation is a long-lost formation of our spirit husbandry sect. Although there is a more complete foundation of the formation here, and we don't have to spend so much effort to do the most crucial things, the incantation to activate the formation is also missing. Wouldn't that be inappropriate?" At the top of the altar, there was a cave of about 10 feet on the high stone wall. At this moment, there were 4 golden core realm cultivators sitting cross-legged in the cave. They were all in the later stage of the golden core realm, and their robes were basically the same. Only their voices and smiles were different. A cultivator with a pointy mouth and monkey cheeks asked in a low voice, "Elder Jia." A fat cultivator with a tender face opened his eyes. He was Yuan Feng, one of the 4 great elders of the spirit husbandry sect. He said, "Elder Jia, I'm sure you know that the spirit husbandry sect used to be a famous sect on the Xiaoyu continent. The thunder-controlling sect and the washing flower sect were all ranked behind the spirit husbandry sect. But why is the situation deteriorating? Many disciples would rather join a sect like the washing flower sect, which has no religion, than join the spirit husbandry sect. Could it be that the spirit beasts of the spirit husbandry sect are not attractive enough?" The elder Zhe with a pointy mouth and monkey cheeks was Shichipeng. When he heard this, he was slightly angry. "Yuan Feng, I asked you about the formation. What do you mean by this? Reverend Ing Su is not here, so you don't have to show off." -8. Chapter 1881. Yuan Feng didn't mind Zhiqiping's words. He turned to look at the other two cultivators and smiled. I believe Elder Man and Elder who also understand what's going on, right? Elder Man's name was Man Yun. He was a cultivator with a long upper body and long arms. There were also white spots on his face. When he heard Yuan Feng's question, he didn't say anything. Instead, he turned to look at the other red-faced old woman. She was the other elder of the spirit husbandry sect, who you opened her eyes, and a cold light flashed through them. She stared at Yuan Feng with her small black pupils and screamed like an owl. Elder Yuan, we know that you are the leader of this operation, and the sect master has instructed us to prioritize the sect. However, you don't have to show off, right? Even if we didn't know about it before, since we are sitting here now, we have already checked the records. My spirit husbandry sect was at its peak tens of thousands of years ago, but for some unknown reason, the sect master and elders disappeared overnight. Since then, the spirit husbandry sect has been unable to recover, and it has been difficult for us to move forward among the cultivation sects in the Dawn Rain continent. Could this 5 Skunda spirit awakening formation be related to the missing seniors? What Elder who said is right. Yuan Feng clapped and smiled. I am obsessed with the Tao of formations. After searching through the records of my spirit husbandry sect, I finally found an incomplete 5 Skunda spirit awakening formation in an old jade pendant. Moreover, from this formation, I obtained some vague information. The disappearance of my thunder-controlling sect seniors should be related to the formation, and it should be related to the Chao's soul essence in the Flame Forest Mountains Lake of Fire. I even found the vague location of the 5 Skunda spirit awakening formation in the jade pendant. Man Yun, who hadn't spoken for a long time, snorted. Needless to say, my spirit husbandry sect seniors died here. I believe Elder Yuan thinks that we have lived for too long and wants us to follow in their footsteps. Elder Man. Although I have lived for 700 years, I still haven't lived enough. I still want to live for 2,000 years. Yuan Feng didn't find it strange and said with a smile, Nascent soul? Man Yun, Zhiqiping, and who you were all shocked. They looked at each other, and their gazes were filled with confusion. Why do you say that? Who you continued. Could it be that Elder Yuan has some secret method? Ha ha ha. Yuan Feng laughed loudly. He stroked his beard and said, Of course there is. Otherwise, why would I be willing to ask the sect master to make such a big move? Not only had they searched for the location of the 5 essences awakening formation more than 10 years ago, they had also sent out many disciples to deceive others. It is only now that I am confident that I dare to reveal this secret method to everyone. Elder Yuan. Zhiqiping smiled and said, Of course, there is a way, but since it can even annihilate a nascent soul cultivator, how can late gold core cultivators like us provoke it? I still have a lifespan left, waiting for the final moment to form my nascent soul. Elder Zhe, there's no need to lie in front of an immortal. The 4 of us are all in the late stage of the gold core realm and have a lifespan of about 700 years. If we can reach the nascent soul realm, why would I take such a big risk? Yuan Feng was still smiling and said, Even if something happened here tens of thousands of years ago, it doesn't mean that it will happen again tens of thousands of years later. As he spoke, he stretched out his hand and took out several jade slips, which flew in front of the 3 of them. Everyone, please take a look. This is the mental cultivation method that I have finally found after decades of searching. Yuan Feng seemed to say casually. Everyone took it and immersed their divine senses in it. However, in just a moment, the 3 of them suddenly raised their heads, their eyes flashing with disbelief. Who you actually exclaimed, Spirit-devouring mental cultivation method? Wasn't this lost long ago? Even beast cultivators don't necessarily have this mental cultivation method. I understand now. Zhiqiping slapped his forehead and looked like he had suddenly realized something. Elder Yuan went out to train 100 years ago. I'm afraid it was for this, right? That's right. I'm grateful that Elder Zhe still remembers the past. Yuan Feng nodded and said, The heavens didn't let me down. I finally found this in a small beast cultivator family in Hung Country. Sigh, but it's a pity. This mental cultivation method, Zhi Qiping was stunned and immediately immersed his divine senses in the jade slips. Sure enough, in the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the three of them looked a little pale. They raised their heads and smiled bitterly. Elder Yuan, aren't you teasing us? This incomplete mental cultivation method can't be used at all. Everyone? If it can't be used, why would I waste so much effort? Yuan Feng said with a smile. The three of them looked at each other, as if they didn't quite understand. Just as the impatient Hu Yu was about to ask, Zhi Qiping suddenly had a flash of inspiration and said in surprise, "Could it be? Elder Yuan is talking about spirit beasts?" Great. Yuan Feng clapped his hands and said, "Elder Zhi finally understands." Hu Yu immediately shook his head and said, "But, although the spirit beasts of us Jelly Spirit Sect Golden Core cultivators are different from the spirit beasts of beast cultivators, they still have a mental connection with the cultivators. Such a dangerous mental cultivation method. If there's an accident, our cultivation will also be damaged." Man Yun frowned and sent his divine senses into the jade slips again. He closed his eyes for a moment and said, "In my opinion, Elder Yuan's idea is quite feasible." "Elder Man, please speak." Hu Yu hurriedly asked again. "Elder Hu, please take a look. This spirit-devouring mental cultivation method lacks a way to erase the spirit imprint in the spirit essence. This thing is basically the complete mental cultivation method, so we don't need it. But without this step, we can't recklessly devour the spirit essence of ancient beasts. That will only cause our fragile souls to be destroyed directly and turn us into idiots. However, if our spirit beasts devour the spirit essence with the spirit imprint, the spirit beast's spirit will naturally erase the imprint in the spirit essence and even devour it. When the spirit beast's strength increases, we will naturally benefit, especially since the spirit essence can directly raise the spirit beast's grade. Our cultivation will naturally rise as well. Moreover, if the four of us use the spirit-devouring mental cultivation method at the same time to devour the spirit essence of a Chaowu and give it to four spirit beasts, the chances of success are quite high." Hu Yu also realized and said with a smile, "The Chaowu is a ferocious beast after all. I don't know if we can bear it." Zhi Qiping said with some worry, "Isn't that simple?" Man Yun said with a smile, "You just have to use the mental cultivation method and extract the spirit essence bit by bit. Everyone, don't forget, we still have the 5 skandhas spiritual awakening formation." Yuan Feng pointed at his feet in the distance and said with a smile, "Let's first gather the strength of all the disciples to activate the formation and release the Chaowu's spirit essence under the formation. After using the formation to weaken its spirit essence, we can then use the mental cultivation method. How can it not succeed?" -8. Chapter 1882. That's right. Although an ant is small, it can still bite an elephant. Hu Yu squinted his eyes and looked at the disciples on the altar. He smiled and said, "After the formation is set up, we'll roughly impart the mental cultivation method to them and let their spiritual beasts absorb some of the essence. Then, we won't have to worry about the ferocity of the Chao Chi's essence." "That's right." Yuan Feng clapped his hands again. "The sect leader also thinks highly of this, which is why he asked me to do this. However, this 5 essences awakening formation, what does it have to do with the Chao Chi beasts? Elder Yuan actually found quite a few Chao Chi beasts?" Man Yun asked again. I don't know how to use it either. However, there's an incomplete sentence on the jade pendant, so I can only prepare for it." Yuan Feng smiled bitterly. "However, Chao Chi beasts are hard to find. The ones that my Spirit Crane sect disciples found are all underage. I don't know if they can be used. Tsk. Chao Chi beasts are second-class spiritual beasts. Once they mature, they have the strength of an early-stage foundation establishment realm cultivator. How can Chi refinement disciples find adult Chao Chi beasts?" Hu Yu smiled. Yuan Feng waved his hand. "This thing isn't important, so I'm not afraid of others knowing about it. If they can find it, then they can find it. If they can't, then they can't. If it was important, I would have informed you long ago." The 3 of them did not comment. "Elders, Let's take a look at the mental cultivation methods first. Although these mental cultivation methods are incomplete, there are still some mysteries within them. I only managed to gain some understanding after looking at them for a long time. Right now, I want to spar with all of you and study them properly. Yuan Feng sat down and said, "If this mission is effective, we'll remember Elder Yuan's kindness." Hu Yu looked at the other two elders and said sincerely, "Us too." Zhi Qiping and Man Yun nodded. "I am already satisfied with the three elders' intentions." Yuan Feng smiled. "The four of us have been in the Spirit Crane sect for hundreds of years. We've been in high spirits when we were young. We've fought for power and cultivation, and we've also been suspicious of each other. Unfortunately, I've only realized now that everything is meaningless. Only the great Tao is above us." Elder Yuan is right. Man Yun nodded and said, "Although I've known this for a long time, who can pursue the great Tao with peace of mind? Spirit stones, cultivation techniques, and even the soul essence in front of me." Zhi Qiping smiled and said, "All right, now that everything has been said, the spirit husbandry sect will still need us to support it together in the future. With this soul essence, the strength of the spirit husbandry sect will definitely increase greatly. In the future, we will still have to work together like today. Indeed, it's better to comprehend the mental cultivation method." Yuan Feng took out the jade slip and said, "I'll tell you what I've comprehended." Above the altar, in a corner, Qian Yuming was also holding a small jade slip. Below him, there were only a few aura-refining disciples repairing the formation. Looking at the extremely small part of the formation in the jade slip and comparing it with the completed part below him, his heart was filled with an indescribable feeling. He was still inferior to Miao Jun. After obtaining some information from the sect, he immediately ran around, wanting to obtain some benefits from the fire ape in the flame forest swamp. Unfortunately, in the end, he realized that he was only a chess piece of the sect. Everything he did was to confuse the public. It was impossible for him to have any relationship with the fire ape. The only thing he could do was listen to the elders' arrangements and repair the formation. Forget it. It's better not to be wishful thinking. Qian Yuming smiled bitterly and thought to himself, that disciple called Xiao Hua from the Imperial Thunder sect is really wise. He didn't come to the flame forest swamp at all. A disciple with such a temperament. It's normal for him to have such a shocking cultivation. Then, the scene of Xiao Hua displaying his divine ability appeared in his mind again. A chill rose from the bottom of his heart, causing him to involuntarily shrink his neck. Unfortunately, how could Xiao Hua be someone he could guess? At this moment, Xiao Hua was standing respectfully on the mountain peak with Zhenyi, welcoming the dozen or so cultivators who had just arrived. These dozen or so cultivators all had different appearances and cultivations. The ones at the front were early gold core cultivators. Behind these cultivators were their respective disciples. Their cultivations weren't weak, at least early foundation establishment. Fellow Taoist Zhenyi, when I received your message, I immediately put aside my chores and rushed over. I hope I'm not too late. A short, wretched-looking old man with a sallow face cupped his hands and smiled. He was Lu Mingsheng, an early gold core cultivator from the Rinsing Flower sect. Behind him were two disciples, one at the early foundation establishment stage and the other at the middle foundation establishment stage. Juniors Li Fengzhu and Shi Xian greet Marshal Uncle Zhen. The two disciples from the Rinsing Flower sect also hurriedly stepped forward and saluted. Forget it, forget it. Zhenyi flicked his sleeve and said, "Marshal nephews, it's only been a few years since I last saw you, but you've actually improved so quickly." At that time, this old man's disciples blushed with shame. Li Fengzhu and Shi Xian glanced at Xiangyang and Yin Qinglian. They felt a bit strange, but since Zhan Yi didn't introduce them, they naturally didn't ask. Next to Lu Mingsheng was an extremely tall old man. He was also incomparably skinny, standing there like a bamboo pole. He could be compared to Xiao Hua. This old man was Jiang Zhuqing from the Xuanyan school. He also cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhen, although this old man received your message first, but I had to take care of some matters in the sect. Moreover, I had to be careful when working together with fellow Taoist from the Imperial Thunder sect, so I was a bit late." Zhenyi waved his hand and said, Hee. Conflicts between sects naturally have to be dealt with between sections. That's official business. Today's visit to Flame Forest Swamp is purely for personal relations. If fellow Taoist Jiang didn't participate, I'm afraid this matter would be even more difficult. At this moment, the two disciples behind Jiang Zhuqing also stepped forward and bowed. Juniors Jie Ming and Qian Han greet Marshal Uncle Zhen. He rise, Zhen Yi smiled and waved his sleeve. Then, Zhen Yi turned to another early Golden Core State female cultivator and said with a smile, although I didn't send a message to Fairy Feng in my opinion, since fellow Taoist Jiang is here, Feng Shuqing from the Huangdao sect can't be far away. This female cultivator was Fairy Feng Shuqing from the Huangdao sect. However, Feng Shuqing didn't have any methods to maintain her youth. Her face was wrinkled and she was indeed old. She was too different from how the fairy described her. However, there were also two beautiful female cultivators behind her. One had a plump figure with a smile on her face. The other had even bones and skin as white as snow. She could be called a fairy. Teske. Feng Shuqing spoke with an unpleasant voice. Old thief Shun, I knew you didn't put me in your heart. You didn't even inform me of such an important matter. If it wasn't for fellow Taoist Zhang's message, I would still be in the dark. Even now, you're still quibbling. Ha ha ha, Fairy Feng, are you here or are you not? Zhen Yi asked with a loud laugh. Feng Shuqing's triangular eyes flashed with a trace of a smile, but she didn't say anything else. Juniors Feng Jieyu and Qing Hao greet Marshal Uncle Zhen. The two female cultivators' crisp voices rang out. After Zhen Yi helped them up, Feng Shuqing glanced at Xiang Yang and the others and asked, are these fellow Taoist Zhen's disciples? I don't think I've seen them before. Then, her gaze swept over Xiao Hua and Xue and she frowned. Moreover, they brought two Qi refinement juniors. This trip to Flame Forest Swamp doesn't seem to be a place for boys training, right? Lu Mingxing and Jiang Zhuqing naturally saw them, but they didn't want to say anything. Now that they heard this, they only looked at Zhen Yi curiously. Juniors Imperial Thunder Sect's Myriad Thunder Valleys disciples Xiang Yang and Yin Qinglian greet seniors and martial brothers. Xiang Yang and Yin Qinglian knew it was time for them to step forward and quickly bowed. Xiao Hua and Xue also glanced at each other and stepped forward. Thunderclap Palace's Myriad Thunder Valleys, Xiao Hua greets seniors. Thunderclap Palace's Xue greets seniors. Xiao Hua and Xue bowed. The Golden Core cultivators nodded slightly, and the Foundation Establishment cultivators cupped their hands in return. Among them, Xuanyan School's Qian Han was slightly taken aback when she heard Xiao Hua's name. She seemed to be thinking about something. After a long while, she revealed an expression of understanding and looked at Xiao Hua thoughtfully. That's strange. Myriad Thunder Valleys. Thunderclap Palace's disciples. Why are they following fellow Taoist Zhen Yi? Feng Shuqing waved his hand and motioned for the four to rise. He covered his mouth and laughed. Of course there are some matters. Zhen Yi smiled. Although I brought these four juniors here, they also have to play a role in this matter. Therefore, they can't be considered as traveling with me. Zhen Ye's words were clear, and Feng Shuqing and the others were slightly taken aback. Jiang Zhuqing gave Feng Shuqing a look, and Feng Shuqing spoke again. Why can't I understand fellow Taoist Zhen's words? The trip to Flame Forest Swamp should be counted by sections. How can your Imperial Thunder sect be divided into two? If that's the case, we might as well count according to the number of people. Even if we count according to the number of people, Qi refinement disciples, I'm afraid it doesn't count. Jiang Zhuqing laughed. If that's the case, I would have brought over a dozen Qi refinement juniors. Since I said it, I naturally have my reasons. However, there are still a few fellow Taoists who haven't arrived yet. Forgive me for not saying anything. What? Old thief Shun, you invited other fellow Taoists? Feng Shuqing was immediately dissatisfied. How many pills can the Thunder Beast's inner core refine? If there are many people, will there be enough for us to share? Zhen Yi smiled and said, that Thunder Beast is with a fire ape. With the cultivation of the four of us, we should be able to trap the Thunder Beast. However, with the addition of a fire ape, will we succeed? Hearing this, not only did Feng Shuqing's expression change, But Jiang Zhuqing and Lu Mingsheng were also dissatisfied. Lu Mingsheng asked, "Fellow Taoist Jun, this is not appropriate. Since there's a fire ape, why didn't you say so in the message earlier? Otherwise, I could have asked the middle or late Gold Core senior brothers in the sect to help. Wouldn't both spirit beasts be subdued?" Hee. Zhenyi knew that Lu Mingsheng's words could not be taken seriously, but he still smiled. Fellow Taoist Lu is right. It's a pity that the message I received was sent by 4 younger disciples. When I sent the message to you, I didn't know there was a fire ape. -8. Chapter 1883. So that's how it is. Jiang Zhuqing's expression softened, but he still shook his head. So the news about the Thunder Beast was spread by fellow Taoist Jun's juniors. Yes, fellow Taoist Jun, you have to reward these 4 juniors well. But I'm afraid it's impossible for your Imperial Thunder sect to get a share of the medicinal pills just because of a piece of news. Feng Shouqing was even more astonished. He almost sneered. Fellow Taoist Jun, these 4 juniors of yours are a little greedy? Although he said 4 juniors, it was obvious that he was referring to Zhenyi. Xiang Yang's face heated up slightly. He glanced at Zhenyi but didn't explain further. I naturally have to discuss this matter with you all. Zhenyi wasn't surprised, and he smiled as he spoke. But at this time, a red beam of light flew over. When Zhenyi saw the transmission talisman, he smiled and pointed in the direction from which the transmission talisman had come. I thought I was already prepared, but who would have thought that fellow Taoist Xiang Min of the 5 Elements sect would be even more prepared? 5 Elements sect? Xiang Min? Feng Shouqing frowned slightly and said reproachfully, Fellow Taoist Jun, don't tell me the helper you invited is this little child? It can't be considered an invitation. Zhenyi smiled bitterly. He knew that Xiang Min's reputation wasn't good. It's just a coincidence. As he spoke, he clapped his hands and sent out a messaging talisman. A moment later, Xiang Min's small figure appeared on the horizon not far away. Beside him were 2 early-stage Golden Core cultivators and 3 Foundation Establishment disciples behind them. Haha. Zhenyi looked at everyone and gestured for them to stay on the mountain peak. He went forward and cupped his hands. Fellow Taoist Xiang, you're actually so well prepared. This is beyond my expectations. It's not just that. Xiang Min's face showed a hint of pride. He glanced at everyone on the mountain peak and said, I've been preparing for this fire ape for many years. If I wasn't confident, how would I dare to invite my friends? Then, he turned around and said, Come, fellow Taoist Zhang, fellow Taoist Sun. This is fellow Taoist Jun of the Imperial Thunder sect. Then, the 2 Golden Core cultivators beside Xiang Min greeted Zhenyi. Their disciples also came over to greet them. It turned out that fellow Taoist Zhang was a cultivator from Jinghua City, Zhang Qingwang. His 2 early-stage Foundation Establishment disciples were Zhu Ming and Bai Mu. The other fellow Taoist Sun was a cultivator from the Imperial Elixir School, Sun Shanko. His disciple was the early-stage Foundation Establishment Li Mian. After the greetings were over, Zhenyi brought the 4 of them to the mountain peak. The cultivators from the various sects got to know each other and exchanged pleasantries. These were all Golden Core cultivators. Although some of them hadn't met before, they were all familiar with each other's names. For a moment, the mountain peak was filled with a joyous atmosphere. After a long while, everyone became familiar with each other. Then, Zhenyi said with a smile, although we all have our own plans for coming to Flame Forest Marsh, because the Fire Ape and the Thunder Beast are in the same place, we naturally have to act together. Previously, I was the initiator of this matter, and fellow Taoist Xiang was also the initiator of this matter. From now on, one person will have to be in charge. What do you think, fellow Taoist Xiang? Xiang Min didn't find this strange. She nodded and said, Fellow Taoist Jun's thoughts are exactly what I was thinking. But if fellow Taoist Jun is the one in charge, how will you arrange the future operations? I naturally have my own plans. But do I have to tell you now? Zhenyi glanced at Xiang Min and didn't say much. Fellow Taoist Jun, since you want to be our leader, if you don't tell me, how can I be convinced? Even if I'm convinced, how can fellow Taoist Sun and fellow Taoist Zhang listen to your arrangements? Xiang Min said with a fake smile. Zhenyi thought for a moment and said with a smile, "My arrangements are simple. We'll gather together first and find the fire ape and the thunder beast in Flame Forest Marsh. When they're unprepared, we'll separate them. My group will attack the thunder beast while fellow Dao Xiang's group will attack the fire ape. As for the specific details, we'll discuss it in detail after the matter is confirmed. What do you think, fellow Dao Xiang?" Ha ha ha. Xiang Min shook her little head like a rattle drum and said with a laugh, "Fellow Taoist Jun's arrangement. To be honest, it's no different from having no arrangement at all." Zhun Ye's expression didn't change. He said calmly, "What do you mean, fellow Taoist Xiang? First of all, Flame Forest Marsh is so big that it's not easy to find the fire ape and the thunder beast. Moreover, if we find the fire ape and the thunder beast, won't they also find us? Separating them, TSK, I'm afraid it won't be easy." Xiang Min said with assurance, "Moreover, since we've already merged into one, doesn't fellow Taoist John want a share of the fire ape's inner core? Hee hee, I won't hide it from fellow Taoist John. The thunder beast's inner core. I'm somewhat coveting it." Zhenyi still had a card up his sleeve. He said with a smile, "I naturally have a way to find that thunder beast. Fellow Taoist Xiang doesn't have to worry about this. Even if we set up an ambush, it's not impossible to let that thunder beast fall into our trap." But what fellow Taoist Xiang said. Without waiting for Zhenyi to finish speaking, Xiang Min's face revealed a look of pleasant surprise. She said anxiously, "What? Fellow Taoist Jun has a way to lure the thunder beast over? If so, our grand plan will succeed." Jin Ye's eyes turned rapidly. He nodded slightly and said with a smile, "That's right. I have a way to lure the thunder beast over. However, what does fellow Taoist Xiang mean by the grand plan will succeed?" Ha ha ha. Xiang Min didn't say anything else. She said with a smile, "As expected, my opportunity has arrived. The heavens actually sent fellow Taoist Jun to me. I can't not want this fire ape's inner core. Fellow Taoist Jun, let's settle the matter of how we're going to distribute these two inner cores first." When Zhenyi saw that Xiang Min was so confident, he couldn't help but be stunned. He turned to look at Lu Mingsheng and the rest, then at Xiao Hua. He turned back and said to Xiang Min, "Fellow Taoist Xiang, didn't you just say which fellow Taoist would be in charge of this matter? How did it become the distribution of inner cores?" "Fellow Taoist Jun, which sect do I belong to?" Xiang Min said proudly, "If fellow Taoist Jun has the confidence to lure the fire ape and the thunder beast over, then Xiang Min has the confidence to kill these two evil beasts. Since the two of us rely on each other, then what difference does it make who's the one in charge?" 5 elements sex array formation? Zhenyi suddenly came to a realization. Joy also appeared on his face. He laughed loudly and said, "I don't understand array formations myself, so I neglected 5 elements sex array formation. With fellow Taoist Xiang's array formation, I'm afraid the 2 spirit beasts won't be able to escape." Feng Shuqing, Jiang Zhuqing, and the others were also overjoyed when they heard this. Jiang Zhuqing also participated in the encirclement of the Thunder Beast last time. After all, the Thunder Beast cultivation was at the middle stage of the Gold Core realm. Several early-stage Gold Core realm cultivators relied on magic treasures and other things, but they could only fight to a draw with the Thunder Beast. There was even a slight gap between them and the Thunder Beast. With the help of the array formation, these 7 early-stage Gold Core realm cultivators and a group of Foundation Establishment realm disciples could definitely kill the Thunder Beast and the Fire Ape. So, before the Thunder Beast and the Fire Ape are lured here, fellow Taoist Jun can be in charge. After these 2 evil beasts enter the array formation, I'll be in charge. What do you think? Xiang Min was in a good mood and said while clapping her hands. -8. Chapter 1884. Great. I have no objections. What about you, fellow Taoists? Zhenyi was the first to agree. After everyone agreed, Xiang Min smiled and said, "Since we're so fated, we might as well divide the Thunder Beasts and the Fire Apes cores into 7 portions, 1 for each of us." Zhang Qingguang and Sun Shankong naturally agreed, while the other cultivators looked at Zhenyi. Zhenyi smiled and said, Our Thunder Beast cores are used to refine medicinal pills. If fellow Taoist Xiang doesn't mind my pill refining techniques, you can leave this matter to me, and I'll just take the medicinal pills in the future. Otherwise, I'll take fellow Taoist's portion of the core. Hee, there's no need to trouble fellow Taoistian. I'll just take the original core. Xiang Min smiled and said, as for the Fire Ape's core, what I can give fellow Taoist is also the original core. And that's great. Jinyi nodded and said, however, the cores of the two beasts can't be divided into 7 portions, but 8 portions. Why is that? Xiang Min looked at the golden core cultivator beside Jinyi and asked curiously. It's like this. Jinyi smiled and said, this poor Taoist wasn't able to lure the lightning beast over. Instead, it was a junior disciple of this poor Taoist who had the means to lure the fire ape over. Fellow Taoist Xiang has seen this junior disciple before. As he spoke, Jinyi pointed at Xiaohua and said, this is Xiaohua, a disciple of my Thunderclap Palace's Myriad Thunder Valley. He has a magic tool that can lure the fire ape over. However, he's not my disciple, so I can't force him to do anything. The price he has to pay is a portion of the Thunder Beasts and the Fire Ape's cores. Afterward, Jinyi repeated what Xiaohua said to everyone and said with a smile, I originally thought that since we're all cultivators of the Thunderclap sect and belong to the same sect, it's inappropriate to ask for an extra portion. However, since Xiaohua has this idea, he must have his reasons. Xiaohua indeed has no use for the medicinal pills I've refined. Therefore, I'll leave this matter to everyone to decide. Xiang Min stared at Xiaohua as if she wanted to see through him. Soon after, she chuckled and said, Xiang Min naturally has no objections. The Thunder Beast's inner core is abundant, so it doesn't matter if it's a little less. Moreover, if it wasn't for Xiaohua's fire-drawing ape technique, Xiang Min's formation could only be empty. What do fellow Taoist Zhang and fellow Taoist Sun think? Zhang Qingguang and Sun Shankong naturally followed Xiang Min's lead. Without hesitation, they smiled and said, I agree. I don't agree. Before Xiang Min could say anything, Feng Shouqing shrieked, I was wondering how fellow Taoist Jin was going to distribute the Lightning Beast cores. It turns out, you want to keep an extra portion for yourself? According to what I know, the distribution ratio has already been set. Each sect can only get 1 portion. Why did it change today? No wonder fellow Taoist Jin didn't mention it just now and insisted on waiting for fellow Taoist Xiang to come over. Could it be? Zhang Yi was unhappy at first. He raised his eyebrows. Feng Baiqing? What's wrong? Could it be that fellow Taoist Jian has made an appointment with me? Isn't it? You have made an agreement before. Feng Baiqing naturally wasn't afraid of me and retorted. Seeing this, Jiang Zhuqing hurriedly stepped forward and frowned. Fellow Taoist Feng, we are discussing the distribution of the spiritual beast's inner core. There's no need to involve other things. Since you don't agree, then don't agree. Humph. Feng Baiqing took a step back and looked coldly to the side. Fellow Taoist Zhan, I won't say anything else. Jiang Zhuqing smiled. Although Xiaohua is a disciple of the 10,000 Thunder Valley, he is also a disciple of your Thunder Palace and your Thunder Controlling sect. He can be your helper and can be regarded as your disciple's helper. Fellow Taoist Jun can deal with his benefits after the Thunder Controlling sect. There's no need to entangle with us. Fellow Taoist Jun, do you think his contribution is the same as ours? Is he qualified to get this portion of the spiritual beast's inner core? My opinion is the same as fellow Taoist Feng's. I don't agree with this. And Jinyi didn't find it strange and looked at Lu Mingxing of the Rinsing Flower sect. Lu Mingxing thought for a moment and sighed. According to my previous opinion, which is also the same as fellow Taoist Feng and fellow Taoist Jiang, Xiaohua is only an aura-refining disciple. He really can't compare with us. It's impossible for him to get an extra share. However, things have changed now. First, there is the addition of the Fire Ape. That's a 5th stage spiritual beast with an early gold core cultivation base, but we don't have the slightest chance of defeating it. Second, there is the participation of fellow Taoist Xiang and the others, as well as fellow Taoist Xiang's formation. With this formation and fellow Taoist Xiang and the others' help, I'm afraid our chances of success will increase by another 40%. But think about it, If the thunder beast and the fire ape don't enter this formation, what's the use of this 40% chance of success? However, if fellow Taoist Xiang follows us to look for the thunder beast, I'm afraid our chances of killing the thunder beast and the fire ape won't increase by even 10%, right? Fellow Taoist Lu, you mean you agree to give the thunder-controlling sect 2 portions? Zhang Zhucheng said thoughtfully. Hee, I don't completely agree, Lu Mingsheng said with a smile. If Xiaohua can lure the fire ape over, then the thunder beast can naturally follow. This way, our chances of killing it will increase by 20%. But the problem is, can Xiaohua lure the fire ape over? That's right. Feng Shuqing screamed again. Fellow Taoist Xiang, don't tell me you don't have any methods to lure the fire ape over when you set up the formation? Humph. Of course I do. Xiang Min's expression turned cold. My disciple, Chan Xinyan, has a raging fire physique and precisely has the fire ape's bloodline. I originally wanted to borrow his true spirit, true blood to lure the fire ape over, but I don't know which bastard killed him, and even his corpse can't be found. This matter. Fellow Taoist Jun also knows about it. That's right. Because of this matter, fellow Taoist Xiang even misunderstood me, thinking that I killed his disciple and even attacked him. Zhenyi suddenly understood why Xiang Min was so angry and attacked him without saying anything else. Motherfucker, I'm really lucky. Xiaohua didn't raise his head. He kept looking at the ground, and he inwardly cried out that he was lucky. Zhang Zhucheng spoke again. Fellow Taoist Lu, do you mean, if Xiaohua can really lure the fire ape and the thunder beast over, he can get a share of the spiritual beast's inner cores? Isn't this too easy? Hee, Xiang Min sneered and said, if fellow Taoist Jiang has the ability to lure the fire ape over, I can give you half of my share of the spiritual beast's inner cores. Fellow Taoist Xiang, Feng Shuqing sneered. How can you be so generous? Could it be that your previous allocation? That's right. Xiang Min said proudly, in my agreement with fellow Taoist Jiang and fellow Taoist Sun, luring the fire ape is also part of it. So that's how it is. Xiaohua was delighted. Since there was a precedent, he wasn't afraid of anything. You can wait for the precedent, but I don't agree with it. Feng Shuqing glanced at the two disciples behind him and said, these two foundation-building disciples of mine also have to contribute, so there's no need to mention allocation at all. What qualifications does an aura-refining disciple have? Why don't all the disciples be included? But when she said this, she shut her mouth again. The Imperial Thunder sect obviously needed 2 more disciples. Cough, cough. Zhang Zhucheng coughed twice, interrupting Feng Shuqing's words. He looked at Lu Mingsheng and asked, fellow Taoist Lu, do you agree or not? Hee. Lu Mingsheng laughed and said, if Xiaohua can lure the fire ape over, I'll agree. Otherwise, I won't agree. Great. Zhenyi clapped and said, now, I have 7 fellow Taoists. Even if you exclude me, you still have 3.5 fellow Taoists who agree, so this matter is settled. Fellow Taoist Lu didn't say he agreed. Feng Shuqing said anxiously, what? Fellow Taoist Feng, am I wrong? Zhenyi sneered and said, if fellow Taoist Feng thinks you can kill the Thunder Beast, then there's no problem. The entire Thunder Beast's inner core is yours. I definitely don't want anything. Now, I can obviously get an extra portion of the Fire Ape's inner core. Fellow Taoist Xiang already understood, and fellow Taoist Lu also understood. Why can't fellow Taoist Feng understand? But your Imperial Thunder sect will get an extra portion of the spiritual beast's inner core. Feng Shuqing argued. That's because my Imperial Thunder sect's disciple has the ability. Zhenyi was a bit angry. If your disciple can lure the fire ape over, this portion will also be yours. Why not? My disciple also has a fire physique. Feng Shuqing said without hesitation. Then, he pointed at the female cultivator with the well-proportioned bones and said, Qing Hao, come here. Yes, master. Qing Hao obeyed and came forward. Hee, the disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect, right? Xiang Min glanced at Qing Hao and sneered. This old man naturally knows about the Imperial Thunder sect's fire rat bloodline. If you want to kill the first-rank spiritual beast, the fire rat, your disciple's bloodline will certainly be useful. However, if you want to lure the fire ape over, this old man thinks you'd better not overestimate yourself." Although Qinghao is a foundation-building cultivator, her face had already turned red from being mocked by a golden core cultivator. However, she didn't dare to retort and could only look down at the ground. Feng Shuqing was too anxious and neglected the matter of the bloodline for a moment, which made him lose face for no reason. Just as she was about to speak, Jiang Zhuqing hurriedly said, all right, don't make fun of the younger generation. We still have to learn from fellow Taoist Jun and guide the younger generation. Since most of the fellow Taoists have agreed, let's do it this way." Qinghao hurriedly stepped back. Zhenyi nodded and said, "Fellow Taoist Jiang is right. This matter isn't a big deal in the first place. 90% of the Thunder Beast's inner core is enough for us to refine medicinal pills. I was just afraid that everyone would hold a grudge, so I said it." "Great. Fellow Taoist Jin is really open and aboveboard." Xiang Min clapped and praised. "No matter if it's I or fellow Taoist Xiang, we should be fair," Zhenyi said with a smile. Xiang Min smiled again and ignored Zhenyi. Instead, she looked at Xiao Hua and asked with interest, "Xiao Hua, this old man has a question?" "Senior Xiang, please." Xiao Hua didn't dare to be negligent and hurriedly bowed. "This old man wants to know, if we don't agree to let you have a share, what will you do?" Xiao Hua didn't think at all and said with a smile, "Senior, this matter, isn't it meaningless? Seniors have already decided on this matter. How can we go back on our words? This junior will just follow the seniors." -8. Chapter 1885. Hehe, Xiao Hua, I can go back on my word at any time. Xiang Min was clearly vindictive towards Xiao Hua's previous rebuttal. Xiao Hua didn't have any expression on his face, but he was annoyed in his heart. He didn't say anything, but reached out his hand and patted his chest, then smiled and said, "Senior Xiang, this matter is nothing more than reason, and the distribution is nothing more than effort. This junior has this request and can also help the seniors. The seniors will definitely pity this junior. This junior's little request, the seniors will naturally agree." Looking at Xiao Hua's gesture of dispersing, Xiang Min seemed to have already anticipated it. She chuckled and said to Zhenyi at the side, "Fellow Taoist Jun, you're a cultivator of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Your bones aren't ordinary." The current Zhenyi was different from a few days ago. He knew that he had to rely on Xiang Min's spell formation to kill the lightning beasts. Thus, he smiled and said, "The myriad Thunder Valley is very famous in my thunderous palace. Master and disciple are both straightforward, so fellow Taoist Xiang doesn't need to mind." Hehe. Xiang Min chuckled again and ignored Xiao Hua and the others. He called Zhenyi, Zhang Qingguang, and the others, and the few of them began to discuss how to set up the spell formation. Xiang Min was a cultivator of the Five Elements sect. He was good at spell formations, and his specialty was the Five Elements soul-capturing spell formation. As long as a cultivator fell into the spell formation, not only would their magic power be captured, even their soul would be extracted. Of course, Xiang Min was only in the early Aurus core stage and couldn't really extract a cultivator's soul. But even so, Xiang Min's words could make the fire apes and lightning beasts confused and reduce 20% of their strength. This kind of spell formation naturally couldn't rely on manpower. The most important thing was the terrain and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Furthermore, the flame forest swamp was filled with violent fire-type spiritual energy of heaven and earth, which was very disadvantageous to the five-element spell formation. Of course, Xiang Min had already considered these factors before coming to the flame forest swamp. He had already made some changes to his spell formation. Now that Xiao Hua could lure the fire apes over, Xiang Min and the others only needed to find a suitable terrain. After Xiang Min explained the conditions of the spell formation to everyone, the 7 Aurus core cultivators each brought their own disciples and went to different directions in the flame forest swamp. Xiao Hua naturally followed behind Zhenyi, and the direction they were heading towards was where the spirit husbandry sect had set up the formation. After just flying for the time it took to brew a cup of tea, Xiao Hua looked all around and said in a low voice, "Grandmaster Zhen, Junior has a matter." "Oh? Speak." Zhenyi wasn't surprised at all. He didn't even turn his head as he spoke indifferently. Junior. Junior's dermic artifact seems to only be able to sense the fire ape's location. I'm afraid it can't lure the fire ape over. Xiao Hua smiled apologetically and said, It doesn't matter if Junior can't obtain the Thunder Beast's inner core, but don't delay Grandmaster's important matter. Humph, Zhenyi sneered. He turned his head to look at Xiao Hua's respectful and reverent expression and said unhappily, You're probably complaining in your heart that this old man didn't explain the conditions clearly, right? No, no, no. Xiao Hua had an embarrassed expression on his face. He actually understood what Zhenyi was thinking, but the Niden was truly related to Xiang Yang's life and death. At this time, he had no choice but to risk offending Zhenyi and warn him. Do you think that just because you can sense the fire ape's location, those old bastards will give you a share of the spiritual beast's inner core? Zhenyi seemed to be in a good mood. He released his divine sense to observe the terrain below him and said, Knowing and luring the fire ape are two different matters. Moreover, the divine sense of a gold core cultivator isn't something that you chi refining disciples can understand. If you pay attention to the movements within several dozen li, you'll be able to sense them. Sensing the fire ape isn't a particularly difficult matter. If this old man didn't praise your divine ability, just that slut phone wooching alone would be enough to mess up this matter. Hee, but this old man also didn't expect Xiangmin would actually be able to lay down a 5 elements formation. This is an exceptional opportunity. But Junior is afraid that the location of the formation is too far from the core of Flame Forest Marsh. Junior won't be able to sense the fire ape, let alone luring it over. Xiao Hua was truly somewhat worried about his personal gains and losses. Zhenyi had clearly stated the conditions. If he couldn't lure the fire ape over, then he wouldn't be able to get a share of the Thunder Beast's inner core. Idiot! If you can sense the fire ape's location, then won't you be able to lure it over? Zhenyi scolded. You only need to fly close to the fire ape and lure it over. Hee, Junior understands. Junior was muddle-headed. Xiao Hua immediately came to his senses and smiled apologetically. This old man also saw that you're quick-witted. You didn't even use a single curse word when you scolded Xiang Min. That's why this old man reminded you. If it was you, this old man, who is as stupid as an ox, this old man wouldn't even care. Zhenyi glanced at the silent Xiang Yang. Facing a gold core cultivator like Zhenyi, Xiang Yang was indeed like a child. He couldn't say anything and could only smile along. The 5 elements formation required the spiritual chi of heaven and earth to have all 5 elements. This was an extremely easy problem in other places, but in Flame Forest Marsh, it was troublesome. Others didn't know that Xiao Hua had been flying with Zhenyi for half a day. Apart from the scarlet flames that filled their eyes, the air was steaming with mist, and only the fire-type spiritual chi was present. The other 4 types of spiritual chi were extremely scarce, especially the water-type spiritual chi, which was nearly extinct. Hee, that place seems pretty good. Xiao Hua didn't dare to release his Buddhist awareness and only used his weak divine sense to observe the surroundings. He then heard Zhenyi whisper with a smile on his face. Soon after, Zhenyi indeed flew for several dozen kilometers and found a place between 2 scarlet mountain ranges. This canyon was sandwiched between 2 mountain ranges and was about 1 kilometer wide. The most suitable location was that the canyon's terrain was somewhat high. The lava in the fire lake beside it couldn't flow in, so the area within several kilometers was filled with gravel. Moreover, it was unknown what kind of spiritual stones were underground. Apart from the water-type spiritual chi being somewhat barren, there were also some metal-type, wood-type, and earth-type spiritual chi. Zhenyi flew to this place and looked around. He then clapped his hands and said, Great, this is the place. However, Zhang Ye's subsequent actions caused Xiao Hua's heart to tremble. Zhang Yi instructed, Wait here for a moment. Then, he flew to the side of one of the mountain ranges. With a wave of his hand, he used a mountain range magic technique and disappeared. Xiao Hua and the others looked at each other in dismay. Although they wanted to know what Zhang Yi was doing, they didn't dare to release their divine sense and could only obediently stay in the air. After the time it took to finish a meal, Zhang Yi leisurely walked out. He had a refreshed look on his face. He stretched out his hand and sent out a transmission talisman. Then, he lowered his head and found a flat place to sit down. We'll also go down. Xiangyang waved his hand and landed about 10 meters away from Zheng Yi. He was now somewhat regretful. He wanted to send a voice transmission to Xiaohua, but he was afraid Zheng Yi would discover him. He wanted to take Yin Qinglian, Xiaohua, and the others and leave, but it was obvious that Xiang Min and the others absolutely wouldn't let Xiaohua leave, let alone Zheng Yi. -8. Chapter 1886. We've spun a cocoon around ourselves. Xiangyang sighed. He looked at Yin Qinglian, who also had a strange expression, and sat down first. Xiaohua was not as pessimistic as Xiangyang. His eyes darted around, looking here and there. No one knew what he was thinking. Not long after, Xiang Min's communication talisman came again. Sure enough, they didn't find a suitable place, and everyone was rushing here. After a full day, the other 6 gold core cultivators brought their respective disciples to this place. Xiang Min's face was not satisfied. After looking for a long time, he took out an unknown magic tool from his storage pouch and flew several laps around the entire canyon. Finally, he sighed and said, "The 5 elements spiritual qi here is relatively mixed. Although it conforms to what I said just now, it is still not the best place to set up a formation." "Hee, it's fine. We'll look elsewhere." Zheng Yi heard and immediately stood up, about to fly away. At this time, Feng Shuqing said in a sharp voice, "Fellow Taoist Jun, don't be anxious." Then, he turned to Xiang Min and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiang, the fire attribute spiritual energy in Flame Forest Marsh is abundant, diluting all other types of spiritual energy. Furthermore, the entire terrain of Flame Forest Marsh is filled with magma. Even the area near Western Huang Town doesn't have a place with abundant spiritual energy of all 5 elements. We can't possibly retreat back to Western Huang Town." "Sigh, how can I not know this?" Xiang Min smiled bitterly and said, "But if the 5 elements spiritual qi is not balanced, the 5 elements soul-capturing formation cannot be sealed, and the formation's effect will be greatly reduced. Fellow Taoist Xiang knows the situation in Flame Forest Marsh is like this. Don't tell me you don't have any countermeasures," Zhang Zhucheng said with a smile. Xiang Min rolled her eyes in annoyance and said with a wave of her sleeve, "Of course I have a countermeasure, but this Xiang's countermeasures have all fallen on my disciples. Now that they have disappeared, this countermeasure is incomplete." "What do you mean, fellow Taoist Xiang?" Feng Shuqing asked curiously. "It's nothing." At this point, Xiang Min had nothing to hide. "My 5 elements sect's 5 elements formation uses the 5 elements magic treasure as the formation core, and uses the 5 elements spiritual qi as the formation guide. It's best if the 5 elements spiritual qi is evenly distributed and equal. However, if the 5 elements spiritual qi is not very evenly distributed, we can also teach 5 disciples with physiques of different attributes how to control the formation. We can let them use their own bodies as vessels to draw in the spiritual qi of heaven and earth and spit out the true qi of their respective attributes." "Oh, I see." Feng Shuqing looked at Zhang Chengguang and smiled, and said, "Fellow Taoist, what attributes do your disciples have?" "Haha, Zhang, 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 Zhang. S disciples have wood and earth. My son's disciples metal." Feng Baiqing said with a smile, "So one of your disciples is of the water element, while the other is of the fire element?" "Yes, of course." There was no expression on Xiang Min's face. Water and fire are the most opposing attributes among the 5 elements. My disciple is the best. I can't say for other attributes, but my disciple has fire attributes. Can't we find a disciple with water attributes?" Feng Shuqing said disdainfully. "If it's as fellow Taoist Feng said, then it's very simple." Xiang Min shook her head. Although the 5 disciples of the 5 elements formation don't need to control the formation, the changes in the formation, especially the release of 5 elements spiritual qi, have to be uniform. If they haven't been trained, I'm afraid it won't be easy. She then looked at Zhang Chengguang and the others and smiled bitterly. "I've been planning with fellow Taoist Sun and fellow Taoist Zhang for a long time. My 5 disciples have also practiced a lot. That's why I dared to come to Flame Forest Swamp. In just a few days. I'm afraid it's not appropriate. Everyone frowned. They didn't expect that setting up a 5 elements formation would require so much attention. Jinyi thought for a moment and smiled. How about this? Fellow Taoist Xiang, we'll go look for the terrain. You teach the technique of controlling the formation to each disciple. Cough, cough. Since the disciples of Jinghua City and Imperial Alchemy School can comprehend it, there's no reason that the disciples of Huangdao sect can't, right? I'm sure fellow Taoist Xiang won't hide it, right? If we find a good terrain and can set up an excellent formation, then let the disciples of Huangdao sect swear a heart oath that they won't teach the formation to outsiders. If we don't have an excellent terrain, fellow Taoist Xiang will reluctantly set up the formation here. How about it? Great. Lu Mingxing clapped and said, Fellow Taoist Jun, you're right. Xiang Min thought for a moment and nodded. That's the only way now. She then asked, which fellow Taoist disciple is of the water element? Their cultivation can't be too low. Lu Mingxing looked at everyone and smiled. My disciple, Li Fengzhu, is of the water element. However, his cultivation is only at the early stage of foundation establishment. I wonder how he'll fare. This, Xiang Min shook her head slightly. The fire element spiritual qi here is very strong. Water element spiritual qi is restrained. Fellow Taoist Feng's disciple has a fire element physique and is at the early stage of foundation establishment. Then, the water element disciple should be at the middle stage of foundation establishment. The middle stage of foundation establishment is best. Is the early stage of foundation establishment okay? Sun Shankong smiled. Without waiting for Xiang Min to speak, Feng Baiqing looked at Jiang Zhucheng and the others. None of your disciples have water element? Everyone shook their heads. What about the Imperial Thunder sect? Feng Baiqing asked Jinyi again. Hee, my Imperial Thunder sect's disciples are of the thunder and fire elements. There are very few disciples with other physiques. Jinyi said with a smile. I'm afraid that's the only way. Feng Baiqing was a bit discouraged, but her eyes suddenly lit up again. She pointed at Xiaohua and Shui and said, What physiques do these two disciples have? Zhenyi naturally didn't know. He turned around and asked, Xiaohua, Shui, what physiques are you waiting for? Disciple is of the fire element. Disciple is of the thunder element. The two of them said in unison, Haha, that's it. Feng Baiqing said with a smile, Let Xiaohua replace Qing. He's an aura-refining disciple, so his magic power is lower than Li Fengzhu's. Isn't that perfect? Huh? Xiaohua was stunned. He couldn't help but smile wryly in his heart. He knew very well that his magic power was definitely higher than Li Fengzhu's. This balance between water and fire still couldn't be achieved. It's not appropriate. Xiang Min shook her head first. Xiaohua isn't an aura-refining disciple. His magic power is too low. He can't cooperate with the other 4 foundation establishment disciples. No, absolutely no. He's just a thunder-controlling sect disciple. If he can attract the fire ape, he'll get a share of the thunder beast's inner core. If he still doesn't do anything, I'll withdraw. Feng Baiqing snorted coldly and said, It's just cooperation. We won't use the true qi inside its body. This flame forest swamp is filled with fire element spiritual qi. Is there a need to take his true qi? Xiang Min had never thought about letting an aura-refining disciple go to the formation core, so she refused without hesitation. But after hearing Feng Baiqing's words, she thought about it for a moment and nodded. Fellow Taoist Feng's words make some sense. However, I'll take a look for now. If it doesn't work when operating the formation, how about letting Qinghao replace it? Let's do that for now. Feng Baiqing curled her lips slightly and didn't say anything else. Grandmaster. Xiaohua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He called out in a low voice and looked at Zhenyi. I'll listen to fellow Taoist Xiang. Zhenyi said without hesitation. Xiaohua opened his mouth, but he couldn't say a word. He simply couldn't refuse. Soon after, Zhenyi and the others flew away in different directions. Xiang Min stayed behind and had the other disciples patrol around. She took out a few jade slips and handed them to Xiaohua, Qinghao, and the others. She said, These are the methods to control water and fire in the 5 elements formation. They're all different. Make a hard oath and use your divine sense to memorize them first. Once you return the jade slips to this old man will teach you. Xiao Hua and the others made a hard oath, then held the jade slips in their hands and immersed their divine sense in them to comprehend them. Xiang Yang took Yin Qinglian and Xue Xue to patrol one side of the valley. This was the side that Zhenyi had just passed by. Xiang Yang released his divine sense and scanned the place. Then, he transmitted his voice. Wife, did you see any clues? Yin Qinglian shook her head. How can we guess the divine abilities of a golden core cultivator? I didn't even look at them. Sigh. Xiang Yang frowned and smiled apologetically. If I knew that the lightning beast's inner core would be so troublesome, this husband wouldn't have come to join in the fun. Hee. Yin Qinglian was rather optimistic and said with a smile, now, it's hard to get off the donkey. Husband, don't think too much. Moreover, even if it's as difficult as a lake of fire, this lowly concubine is willing to exchange it for your lifespan. Little junior brother is also willing. Little junior brother. Warmth flashed in Xiang Yang's eyes. His gaze couldn't help but look at Xiao Hua, who was sitting cross-legged in the valley. The 5 elements sex formation control technique wasn't too complicated. For Qing Hao, who had never seen a formation before, it was naturally very difficult. However, for Xiao Hua, it was nothing. He only had to finish reading the things inside the jade slips to understand. It was nothing more than combining the formation, controlling magic power, and harmonizing the spiritual energy of heaven and earth around him to cooperate with Xiang Min's technique. Naturally, just as Xiang Min said, this thing relied on tacit understanding and proficiency. However, Xiao Hua didn't think he was infallible. While listening to Qing Hao's questions, he also added in a few sentences from time to time. His performance was no different from an aura-refining disciple. Xiao Hua liked to ask questions, so after half a day, he didn't let Xiang Min see anything. 10 days had passed since they had comprehended the method of controlling the formation. The 6 Jindan stage seniors had not sent any messages back, and Xiao Hua and the others had already understood what they should have understood. They only needed to cooperate with each other. Forget it. Xiang Min looked at the red sun in the sky and waved her sleeve. Several summoning talismans flew out, and she said with a wry smile, since they still haven't sent back a message, I'm afraid there's no place more suitable than here. Soon after, without waiting for Zhan Yi and the others to return, she began to arrange the 5 elements soul-capturing formation. In Xiao Hua's mind, wasn't it just arranging a formation? Who hadn't done it before? It would only take half a day or a day to complete it. However, when he saw Xiang Min's cautiousness and how she put the most basic formation flags, formation plates, and other things into the valley, he suddenly realized that the 5 elements soul-capturing formation covered the entire valley. It was a formation that covered an area of several kilometers. It was far from simple. -8. Chapter 1887. As a result, Xiao Hua unconsciously paid attention to it while feeling disdainful. Fortunately, Xiang Min didn't avoid people. She used 2 days to set up the entire framework of the Great Array. Then, according to the order of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, she arranged the 5 array cores one by one. Each array core actually took 4 to 5 days of work. By the time the entire Great Array was set up, nearly a month had passed. Zhen Yi and the others had gradually returned 10 days after Xiang Min finished setting up the array. Zhen Yi and the others naturally didn't stay idle. They held the jade slip Xiang Min gave them in their hands and comprehended it. It also contained part of the control of the formation. After the formation was activated, they prepared to enter the formation and assist Xiang Min in killing the enemy. Xiao Hua's group of 6 naturally didn't patrol around the valley like Xiang Yang and the others. After Xiang Min set up the array core, they were arranged to be in the array core by Xiang Min gloriously. It was to comprehend the changes in the spiritual chi of heaven and earth in the array core. Xiao Hua released his divine sense and could sense the changes in the spiritual chi of heaven and earth due to the arrangement of the array. However, if he were to use these changes to control his Fali, it would be a little difficult. Of course, Xiaohua's eyes almost never left Xiang Min's formation. Sometimes, even his magic eyes were open. From beginning to end, watching a great formation being set up was definitely a rare opportunity for Xiaohua. Xiaohua's attention naturally aroused Xiang Min's vigilance as well. Unfortunately, this five-element formation was a grand formation. If it was under normal circumstances, it would be set up by a few five-element sect cultivators. Under the best circumstances, it should be set up by cultivators of the 5 types of physiques, and in the end, the cultivator who presided over the formation would combine them. However, Xiang Min coveted the fire ape's inner core and didn't want the other disciples of the sect to interfere. Therefore, she could only set up the formation by herself. Not to mention the exhaustion, the method of setting up the formation was also exposed. After Xiang Min finished setting up all the formations, her sharp gaze swept over Xiaohua and she transmitted her voice. Xiaohua, did you enjoy watching it? It's very enjoyable. Xiaohua rolled his eyes and smiled apologetically. I've heard of formations a long time ago and have also encountered some formations, but I've never seen how they were set up. Now that I've seen Senior Xiang's technique, although I haven't seen the might of this 5 elements formation, but in terms of the area covered by this formation, the formations that I've encountered before are not worth mentioning. Moreover, Senior Xiang, I've also heard from others that the path of formations is the most profound. It's more profound than any mental cultivation method, alchemy technique, or talisman technique. It's absolutely impossible for a formation to be set up by a single cultivator. It should be set up by at least 2 cultivators of the same cultivation level. Elder, how did you manage to complete it by yourself? Xiaohua said very sincerely. This is also what this little one is most puzzled about in these past few days. A hint of pride appeared on Xiang Min's face. He waved his hand and said, You're an aura-refining disciple who doesn't know anything about formations. What do you know? The path of formations is not something you can pry into. What you know is nothing more than hearsay. How can you take it seriously? If a cultivator's Dao technique is profound and he is proficient in array formations, why can't he set up an array formation by himself? Xiaohua bowed. This time, he was just as sincere as before. Thank you for your guidance, Senior Xiang. When he saw that Xiaohua, who had always been somewhat arrogant and unruly, actually thanked him after hearing a few words, he was stunned at first. However, he soon realized that Xiaohua was thanking him because he peeked at his method of setting up the formation. Thus, he raised his brows and looked at Zhenyi, who wasn't far away, and said in a low voice, You're quite obedient and eager to learn. It's a pity that you're not a disciple of my 5 elements sect. Otherwise, this old man would have been able to give you proper guidance. Thank you for your praise, Senior. When Xiaohua saw that he had fooled him, he said with a smile, This little one has been watching for a long time. I've always been looking forward to seeing Senior's elegant demeanor and activating this formation. Let's see what kind of might it has. Don't worry. I definitely won't disappoint you. Xiang Min laughed. He flicked his sleeves and walked towards Zhenyi and the others. Xiang Min naturally exhausted his magic power and mental strength to set up the 5 elements soul-capturing formation. He rested in the valley for 3 days before he recovered. Then, Xiang Min discussed with Zhenyi and the others. They would first practice the method of controlling the formation until they were familiar with it. Only then would Xiaohua and the fire ape come over. Naturally, everyone agreed. Thus, Xiaohua and the others sat cross-legged in the 5 formation eyes of the 5 elements soul-capturing formation according to the previous arrangement. Xiang Min took out 5 magic treasures of different styles from his storage bag and placed them in front of the 5 people. Then, he flew to the sky above the valley, which was also the center of the formation. He clapped his hands, and a round plate about 3 feet in size flew in front of him. This round plate was the main formation disc of the 5 elements soul-capturing formation, the 5 elements disc. Xiang Min opened his mouth and a mouthful of true essence fell on the 5 elements disc. The 5 elements disc trembled slightly and began to rotate extremely slowly. Then, Xiang Min continuously cast seals on the 5 elements disc. The 5 elements disc sped up its rotation, and as it rotated, it began to emit a bright red brilliance. In less than half a cup of tea's time, the brilliance became a brilliant ball of light. Xiang Min shouted from high up in the sky, "Fire formation I Xiaohua. Inject your magic power into the magic treasure." Yes, disciple understands. Xiaohua didn't dare to neglect. Although he knew that he might expose his strength, at this moment, it was impossible for him to have any chance to retreat. Xiaohua formed seals and injected his magic power into the triangular magic treasure in front of him, according to what he comprehended in these dozens of days. Wang Wang Wang, with the infusion of Xiaohua's magic power, the magic treasure gradually flew up from the ground and slowly flew above Xiaohua's head. The magic treasure in the eye was suffused with red brilliance. Xiang Min was very satisfied with the five elements disc. The ball of light on the five elements disc separated a ray of light and shot toward the magic treasure above Xiaohua's head. In the blink of an eye, the magic treasure and the five elements disc were connected together, and the brilliance on the five elements disc became more and more brilliant. Just when the magic treasure and the five elements plate were connected, Xiaohua suddenly felt a powerful suction force coming from within the magic treasure. He didn't dare to be careless, and once again used the unique technique of the five elements array to absorb the surrounding fire attribute spiritual energy of heaven and earth into his body, and then without refining it, he sent it into the magic treasure. However, just when the fire attribute spirit energy in Xiaohua's body was being transferred to the magic treasure, according to the method given in the jade slip, there suddenly appeared a continuous obscure connection. It was the same as when Xiaohua used the prairie fire cultivation technique to refine the fire attribute spirit energy in heaven and earth. Although it was only a discontinuous obscure, the spirit energy sent to the magic treasure was less. At the same time, the light between the magic treasure and the five elements disc appeared to be faintly bright and dark. Xiaohua, Xiang Min shouted, "Dozens of days of comprehension. Is it still not enough for you to comprehend the method of control?" Yes. Xiaohua was also puzzled in his heart. The method he used was indeed correct, but he didn't know why it would cause a continuous obscure connection. However, Xiaohua tried a few more times, and the results were usually the same. -8. Chapter 1888. Xiang Min coldly snorted and slapped the five elements plate with her hand. The resplendent orange-red brilliance just now was annihilated, and the brilliance between the five elements plate and the fire-type magic treasure also scattered. The fire-type magic treasure directly fell on top of Xiaohua's head. Rise, Xiang Min turned around and saw the water formation eye opposite Xiaohua. Over there was the Huan Hua sect's early-stage foundation establishment cultivator, Li Fengzhu. Xiang Min activated her technique, and the five elements plate spun while emitting a light blue brilliance. Immediately, Li Fengzhu also activated the water-type magic treasure on the formation eye. An azure ray of light connected the five elements plate and the water-type magic treasure together. That ray of light was overflowing with color, and the azure light constantly flowed, appearing very stable. The five elements plate also stopped in the air. Excellent. Xiang Min smiled and said, as expected of a foundation establishment cultivator, extraordinary. Then she turned around and said to Xiaohua, "Xiaohua, although the water-fire formation eye isn't the most basic formation eye of the five elements formation, it is the most important in this flame forest swamp. We must first activate these two formation eyes. Are you ready now?" Xiaohua nodded and said, "Disciple is ready. I'll try again." Xiang Min restrained her temper and spat out another mouthful of true essence. The five elements plate spun again, but this time, when Xiang Min used her technique, an orange-red suddenly appeared in the light blue brilliance. As the five elements plate spun and Xiang Min poured in her magic power, the orange-red became increasingly larger until it reached half the size of the five elements plate. It was exactly the same as the light blue. Seeing this, Xiaohua promptly did the same as before. He activated the fire-type magic treasure in the air, but as before, the orange-red light between the fire-type magic treasure and the five elements plate was a faint light, and it was a clear contrast with the azure light of the water-type magic treasure. With a crisp pa sound, Xiang Min extinguished the orange-red brilliance above the five elements plate, and the 5 elements plate stopped in the air. Xiaohua. Xiang Min's face was very gloomy as she landed in front of Xiaohua. Her small stature, which was much shorter than Xiaohua, actually stirred up an extremely frightening aura. Clearly, Xiang Min was extremely angry. Xiaohua, what's wrong with you? Such a simple control technique? Can't you practice? Zhenyi naturally couldn't let Xiang Min reprimand the Imperial Thunder Sect disciple, so he immediately frowned. Reporting to Grandmaster, Xiaohua also had a wronged expression on his face as he said with a bitter face, although this technique is the method to control the formation, this junior can also comprehend it. It's also normal when I circulate the spiritual energy in my body, but it's inexplicable, producing an unclear and obscure feeling. Obscure. Xiang Min was stunned and immediately understood. She said in shock, You have a fire attribute constitution? Junior naturally has a fire attribute physique. Moreover, it's a concealed fire physique. Xiao Hua's heart immediately quivered, and a trace of unease arose in his heart. Xiao Hua should have a fire attribute physique. Zhenyi nodded and said, Our Imperial Thunder sect rarely accepts disciples with physiques other than those with lightning and fire attributes. Moreover, all disciples have to be tested before they enter the Imperial Thunder sect. That shouldn't be. Xiang Min furrowed her brows tightly. Only disciples who don't have a fire attribute physique will have difficulty controlling the fire attribute spiritual energy of heaven and earth through their bodies. Difficulty means that they are close to the fire attribute. Then, Xiang Min stared at Xiao Hua and asked, You have a pure fire physique? This. Xiao Hua hesitated and said, This junior also doesn't know. But during the test, there were other colors. What colors? Xiang Min asked. Xiao Hua shook his head. Disciple doesn't know. It was tested by others. There were also many people. Disciple didn't understand this at that time. I didn't even know it was a physique test. Really troublesome. Xiang Min also couldn't say anything about the Imperial Thunder sect. She turned to Feng Shuqing and said, Fellow Taoist Feng, let your sect's disciple try. At this moment, Feng Shuqing couldn't say anything. He could only let Qing Hao take the center of Xiao Hua's formation. As everyone expected, Qing Hao easily activated the fire attribute magic weapon. The orange light above the 5-element disc was like the azure light, flowing with brilliant colors. The orange light flowed freely. After that, the metal attribute Li Mian stood on the metal attribute formation core and used the golden light to connect the 5-element disc and the metal attribute magic weapon together. The wood attribute Li Mian stood on the wood attribute formation core and used the cyan light to connect the 5-element disc and the wood attribute magic weapon together. However, just as everyone's hearts were about to relax, another change occurred. Jinghua City's Bai Mu, an early-stage Foundation establishment cultivator who had long practiced the Earth-type array core countless times, was actually the same as Xiao Hua, unable to connect the Earth-type magic treasure with the 5-element disc. In fact, he was even inferior to Xiao Hua. The dark brown light was intermittent, almost unable to connect. Zhang Qingguang's face immediately turned ugly. He first scolded Bai Mu, but Bai Mu also felt wronged. He had practiced the technique for a long time and was already confident. However, just like Xiao Hua, when the spiritual energy of heaven and earth flowed through his body, it produced an obscure state. Zhang Qingguang frowned, looked at Xiang Min and explained, Bai Mu was personally taught by I. His physique is earth attribute. Could it be? Fellow Taoist Zhang, can you show me the magic tool used to test disciples' attributes? Xiang Min couldn't say this to Zhenyi, but she didn't have any scruples with Zhang Qingguang. Zhang Qingguang shook his head. That thing is only used to test disciples' attributes. It's not usually used. Why would I need that thing? Feng Shuqing also smiled. If you don't have a magic tool, then you can only look at spells. Which fellow Taoist can practice such a useless spell? When Feng Shuqing said this, even if someone practiced it, they definitely wouldn't make a sound. Sigh. Xiang Min clapped her hands and took out a fist-sized bead. She said helplessly, This is the 5-element bead of my 5-element sect. Although it's not used to test the body's attributes, it still has this effect. Fellow Taoist Zhang, please ask your sect's disciples to come over. There's no need to circulate or anything like that. Just hold it in your hand, hold your breath, and wait quietly. Yes. Seeing Zhang Qingguang's signal, Bai Mu hurriedly stepped forward and respectfully took the five-element bead in his hand. However, when the five-element bead entered Bai Mu's hand, there was no change at first. After waiting for a while, a dark brown mist formed in the center of the bead, and then quickly spread toward the walls of the bead. However, before the mist reached half of the bead, a faint green mist appeared and mixed in with the dark brown mist. Although there wasn't much of it, it was very obvious. Sigh, Bai Mu has an earth and wood constitution. Xiang Min sighed and took the five-element bead. She said, because there are very few wood attributes, ordinary magic tools can't distinguish them. This five-element bead is very sensitive to the five elements, and it has the power of a magic tool. Of course, it can distinguish them. Then, she glanced at the five-element disc in the air and explained, although Bai Mu only has a small amount of wood attributes in his body, the formation's control technique is only effective on earth attribute spiritual chi of heaven and earth. When he inhales earth attribute spiritual chi of heaven and earth, he will naturally become sluggish. This way, he won't be able to control the earth attribute formation core. Io, what should we do now? Zhang Qingguang was instantly stupefied. Not only him, but Zhen Yi and the others were also stunned. Which fellow Taoist's disciple has an earth attribute? Xiang Min shouted anxiously. But after shouting a few times, no one answered. They didn't have many disciples with them, so who would think of having a five-element physique? Even Xiang Min and the others didn't think of bringing two spares. Xiang Min looked at everyone looking at each other and could only say, sigh, if it really doesn't work, then we can only be the formation core. Fine. Zhen Yi nodded. This formation is related to the success or failure of killing the two beasts. If we can trap the two beasts in the five-element formation, we'll be far stronger than a golden core cultivator. However, after Zhen Yi finished speaking, the 7 golden core cultivators looked at each other. Unexpectedly, none of them walked out. None of the 7 golden core cultivators had an earth attribute physique. It can't be. Xiang Min was dumbfounded. Yes, earth attribute physique was the most common attribute in the cultivation world. Perhaps 5 out of 10 cultivators had an earth attribute physique. Moreover, earth attribute physique was even more common in the entire Dawn Rain continent. Almost all of the secular people had an earth attribute physique. However, it was precisely because earth attribute physique was common that their aptitudes were slightly lower. Those who could cultivate to foundation establishment or golden core realm were fewer than those with the other 4 attributes. Damn it! Zhen Yi slapped his thigh and laughed. I really wish I had an earth attribute physique right now. Zhen Yi was joking. Lightning attribute physique was rare in the entire Dawn Rain continent. Its cultivation speed was much faster than the usual 5-element physique. Moreover, the Imperial Thunder Sect's magic arts were most beneficial for lightning attribute cultivators. How could he neglect the essentials and focus on the trifles? Sigh, I'm afraid I have to make a trip back to the sect. Xiang Min looked at everyone and asked, which fellow Taoist is willing to make a trip back? I have to preside over the formation and can't be delayed. However, now that things had come to this, who would want to go back? If he left and someone else coincidentally came, the formation would be completed and the two beasts would be killed. Wouldn't they lose their inner cores? Xiang Min knew what everyone was thinking and could only say, why don't any fellow Taoists send a disciple back, or send a message to Western Huangtown's transportation formation? Fellow Taoist Feng, your Huangdao sect seems to be the closest to Western Huangtown, right? Zhen Yi thought for a moment and smiled. Why don't we ask fellow Taoist Feng's disciple to make a trip back? Your Imperial Thunder sect isn't too far away, right? Why can't Imperial Thunder sect's disciples make a trip back? Feng Shuiqing smiled coldly. Zhen Yi spread his hands. My Imperial Thunder sect only accepts lightning and fire attribute physiques. We don't accept earth attribute disciples. Feng Shuiqing was speechless. He pointed at Xiaohua and said, Xiaohua isn't lightning or fire attribute. What attribute does he have? I'm not sure about that. He definitely is an earth attribute. Zhen Yi smiled. Humph, Feng Shuiqing pointed. Whether he's Earth attribute or not, can't we just test it with the 5-element pearl? Then let's test it. What's there to be afraid of? If he's Earth attribute, I'd be happy, Zhenyi said without a care. -8. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.